Chapter 401, Part 1. Chen, what are you looking at? Tony, who was behind him, stepped forward and looked forward with some confusion. Then, when he saw the outfit of the figure in front of him, Tony paused and a trace of surprise flashed across his face. The other party is wearing a uniform with blue and white stripes all over the body, which looks like the stars and stripes. He is tall and strong, has a handsome face, and has neat short blonde hair, which gives him a clean and neat temperament. But that's not the most eye-catching thing. Behind the opponent, Tony could clearly see a wide metal buckler being carried behind his back. Such an iconic shield suddenly evoked some memories in Tony's mind, and he blinked subconsciously. Blinking, he said, "Hey man, are you cosplaying? I have to say, your outfit is pretty cool. Especially the shield behind you. Where was it made? It feels no different from the one on Captain America." After hearing Tony's words, the man slowly turned his head to look here. When he saw the steel battle suit on Tony, a look of surprise flashed in the man's eyes. But when he saw the look on Tony's face looking careless, the man frowned subconsciously. Tony 13 Stark. Striding forward, the man stretched out his right hand and said seriously, "Steve Rogers." Tony raised his eyebrows, stretched out his hand to shake hands with the other person, and then said, "Brother, your name is the same as that of an old antique." Ahem. Finally, Phil Coulson behind him couldn't stand it anymore. He coughed a few times and stepped forward to introduce. "Tony, I haven't introduced you yet." He pointed to Steve aside. "Steve Rogers, the first superhero in history." "That's right. He's the one you were thinking of." "Steve, this is..." Before he finished speaking, Steve interrupted. "Phil Coulson, no introduction is needed. You already told me before you came here, didn't you?" After saying this, Steve turned to look at Chen Luo. At this time, his eyes suddenly became much softer. He stretched out his right hand and said solemnly, "Mr. Chen Luo, thank you for everything you have done for this world. You are a real hero." The reason why he has such an attitude towards Chen Luo is because Steve learned about Chen Luo's contribution to the world over the years through some popular science from Phil Coulson. If nothing else, let's talk about the apocalypse 8 years ago. No one knows what the world would be like now if Chen Luo hadn't stepped forward. From the perspective of Steve, who has also accomplished such a feat as saving the world, Chen Luo definitely has a reason to be respected by him. After a few people exchanged greetings, Steve turned to look at Loki behind Chen Luo and said, "He is Loki? The god in Norse legend?" Looking the other person up and down, Steve's eyes flashed with confusion, obviously a little puzzled that Loki was caught so quickly. As if he had read his thoughts, Loki twitched the corners of his mouth, lowered his head, and a light flashed in his eyes. Fortunately, Steve didn't hesitate too much. After the three of them got on the plane, Phil Coulson directed the flight towards the headquarters base. That is at the same time that Chen Luo and the others set off. In the base where the Tesseract was originally stored, because of Loki's incident, Fury did not stay here too long. He asked Dr. Sylvig to continue researching the Rubik's Cube, and then left in a hurry. It was at this moment that Hawkeye Barton, who stayed at the base and was responsible for guarding the safety of the Rubik's Cube, suddenly made a move. He quickly took action and eliminated all the agents in the base. Then he quickly rushed out of the base with the doctor and the Tesseract, grabbed the vehicle, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Because all this happened so suddenly, and Barton chose to take action in the base was hit hard instantly without anyone being prepared. When the Rubik's Cube was taken away, the self-destruction program of the base was also activated by Barton. Shortly after the two left, the entire cemetery was destroyed in an instant. Seeing that the base was completely destroyed and the staff who finally escaped were horrified, they immediately contacted Fury for help. After receiving the news from over there, Fury's mind went blank for a moment, and he was obviously very confused about Barton's sudden defection. But fortunately, Fury also reacted quickly and came to his senses immediately. After thinking for a moment, he soon shifted his suspicion to Loki. This is not difficult to judge. After all, Barton has never shown any signs of betrayal in the past. If he really has different intentions for S.H.I.E.L.D., Fury is confident that he should be able to see the clues with his eyes. What a coincidence. That is, shortly after Loki left the base, Barton suddenly defected without any warning and took the Tesseract with him. Considering that Loki's appearance at that time was also related to the Rubik's Cube, it is obvious that Loki there is a strong possibility that there is a connection with Barton's defection. Barton's defection was enough to worry him, but it was nothing compared to the Tesseract he took away. After all, Fury knows better than anyone the importance of the Tesseract. At that time, when technology was far less developed than now, Hydra almost destroyed the world with the help of the Tesseract. Now that this artifact has fallen into the hands of others, once he successfully guides the power contained in the Rubik's Cube, he may have to do it again facing a crisis that could destroy the world. Thinking of such consequences, Fury's heart suddenly tightened. No, we must find the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube. 843-inch So Fury immediately contacted Phil Coulson to see if he could get information about Luo of the Rubik's Cube through Loki's mouth. After making the call, Fury immediately told Phil Coulson what happened here. After hearing Fury's narration, Phil Coulson instantly understood the seriousness of the matter and nodded to express his understanding. After hanging up the phone, Fury was relieved when he learned that Chen Luo had successfully captured Loki. Now that Loki has been arrested, it won't take long for them to know the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube. Although I think so, the Rubik's Cube is now wandering outside. If I don't find it back for a day, there will be a risk of thunderstorms at any time. In addition, the scene of Loki's sudden appearance flashed through Fury's mind from time to time, and Fury had a bad premonition in his heart from time to time. After thinking for a moment, he finally decided to add a layer of insurance. It seems it's time to put the Avengers project on the agenda. Thinking of this, Fury suddenly made a decision in his mind, turning around and walking toward a secret room deep in the base. He walked into the room and pressed the front button. Not long after, the 5 screens in front of Fury suddenly lit up, and then a voice came. Fury, what do you want from us? Chapter 402, Part 1, is such that Fury didn't dare to neglect and quickly told everything about his thoughts. You're playing with fire, Commander. After listening to Fury's thoughts, on one of the screens, the representative of the Eagle Country said with a serious face, "This is not a power you can control. Have you ever fought in a war, Mr. Congressman?" There was no fear on Fury's face, a real war. Do you like being controlled when fighting? You mean Asgard declared war on Earth? No, I don't mean Asgard, I mean Loki. He can't be alone. A voice on another screen sounded. I remember he also has a brother. Where are the others? Are they not here? Our intelligence shows that Thor has no ill intentions towards the Earth, Fury said calmly, but he is far away in the kingdom of God now, too far away from us. We can't count on him to help us. We can only rely on ourselves. Fury, the representative of Eagle Sauce Country spoke again. You should focus more on the second phase of work now. The second phase is to deal with this kind of, Sir Congressman. Before he finished speaking, Fury interrupted him. With all due respect, the second stage is not yet mature. But our enemy has arrived. Fury looked serious and his tone was solemn. We need a response team. Just like the captain back then, if it weren't for him, I'm afraid the world would be a different place now. You should also be impressed by the apocalypse 8 years ago, right? If it weren't for Mr. Chen Luo's help, it's not certain whether we would still be standing here now. With these things as examples, can't you see the role superheroes can play in dealing with these things? At times like this, they are far more reliable than we think. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of everyone in front of the screen suddenly changed. After a moment of silence, a voice sounded again from the front. The Avengers proposal has been terminated. Fury, we've seen the list. You have the world's most elite secret agent organization in your hands. Are you really going to leave the survival of mankind in the hands of a bunch of freaks? I didn't say who to give it to. I just said we need a response team like this. Fury argued hard and refused to be outdone. They may work on their own, or even get out of control. But I believe that as long as we use them properly, they are exactly the people we need now. Do you believe that? War cannot be solved by relying on trust, Commander Xi. You're right. Fury nodded and asked, but the most important thing to rely on in a war is soldiers, isn't it? On the other side, Chen Ji and others were on the plane. After hanging up the phone, Phil Coulson frowned and quickly came to Loki with a serious expression. Barton's defection has something to do with you, right? Where is he now? Also, where did he take the Rubik's Cube? Tony on the side turned around and asked, Phil Coulson, what happened? After the words fell, Steve, who was standing in front of the fuselage, always maintaining a vigilant posture, also turned around and looked over with some confusion. Is such that Phil Coulson took a deep breath. After receiving the director's order, he no longer held back anything that happened in the base and told everyone the truth. So the Tesseract was taken away by your people? After listening to Phil Coulson's narration, Tony twitched his lips slightly and shook his head. It seems that SHIELD's defensive strength is not very good. Let me see. If this Rubik's Cube is really so important, you might as well leave it to me for safekeeping. So good. Tony. Steve frowned slightly and explained, Barton agent probably didn't defect on purpose. After all, the enemies he faced at that time were from other planets. We may not know about his methods. Really? Tony glanced at Loki from the corner of his eye. According to what you said, since he has the means to control people's hearts, why didn't he use it when he fought with us before? Could it be that you want to say that he was caught by us on purpose? Maybe it was because the two of them had some inherent dislike for each other, but not long after they met, Chen Luo saw the two of them arguing several times, but even so, he had no intention of stepping forward to stop him and just sat quietly aside. His eyes occasionally fell on the mind scepter that was snatched from Loki's hand not far away, and light surged in his eyes. Mind gem. Chen Luo definitely knew the nature of this scepter very clearly. It was one of the legendary 6 infinite gems, which had the power to control the mind and even give life to dead objects. The ability of the former has been clearly demonstrated in Barton's defection, but the conditions for the latter to be realized are undoubtedly somewhat troublesome. According to his understanding, if he wants to use it to give life to dead things, then this gem will belong to the new life form and serve as the source of energy to maintain his life. From the day he was born, his life is closely linked to this gem. Once the gem is taken away, it means that the other person's life has come to an end. Such a price is undoubtedly worthless to Chen Luo. Not to mention the latter ability, let's talk about the former ability to control the mind. It is not very useful for Chen Luo, who possesses the hypnotic ability. Moreover, with his current strength, the chance of using this ability is also small. Thinking of this, Chen Luo could suddenly understand why Thanos was willing to hand over these infinite gems to Loki. It's really tasteless. Chen Luo withdrew his gaze, sighed slightly in his heart, and ignored Scepter's existence. Now this scepter has some other uses in Loki's hands. It's not easy to take it away directly. It's not too late to take it away after this incident is over. It depends on how this guy performs on the next stage. Turning to Loki aside, Chen Luo's eyes were dark, and there was a hint of expectation in his heart. As if feeling something, Loki turned his head subconsciously. When he saw Chen Luo's eyes, for some reason, Zhao, Loki's heart suddenly jumped and he was filled with surprise and uncertainty. This guy, did he see something? Just when Loki was having some random thoughts, the next moment, boom, the originally dark night sky outside suddenly turned bright, followed by deafening thunder and countless lightning flashes across the sky, which immediately attracted my and their attention. What's going on? Tony subconsciously turned to look out the window. Is it going to rain? Loki, Phil Coulson, who had been watching the other person, suddenly said. Looking at Loki's somewhat ugly expression at the moment, he wondered, what's wrong with you? Are you afraid of thunder? No. Looking at the day outside the window, Loki could see that he was a little irritated. I just don't like that guy who appears with the thunder and lightning. Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, the next moment, the plane sank suddenly, as if it was hit by some heavy object, and suddenly began to shake. Chapter 403, Part 1. This sudden change instantly aroused people's vigilance. What sound? Tony subconsciously raised his head and looked above the cabin. Take it easy. At this time, Chen Luo was no longer silent. He stood up slowly and said, a guest is here. After saying that, Chen Luo turned to look at Phil Coulson. Phil Coulson, open the door and let Thor in. Thor. Phil Coulson was stunned for a moment, then immediately reacted, nodded, and immediately stepped forward to open the door. The cabin door opened, and the next moment, accompanied by a bright flash of lightning, a tall man with a red cloak on his back and a short hammer in his hand fell from the sky and walked toward the cabin. Thor. Seeing that it was really Thor arriving, Phil Coulson was relieved and quickly stepped forward to greet him. However, Phil Coulson did not expect that Thor's eyes were always fixed in one direction, completely ignoring his existence and striding towards Loki. Loki. Grabbing it, Thor's eyes flashed with worry, but he quickly calmed down. Without saying anything else, Thor took Loki and turned to the hatch. With a movement of his feet, he flew away in an instant. All this happened so suddenly that before Phil Coulson could react, he saw their main target disappearing into the cabin 370. Is this guy leaving without even saying hello? Tony reacted, frowned, put on his helmet again without saying a word, and chased after Thor in the direction where he disappeared. Let me teach this arrogant Asgardian a lesson. Looking at Tony's disappearing back, Steve looked confused, turned around and asked, is that guy one of ours? That's not important anymore. Phil Coulson reacted and said quickly, Thor, he came here, probably to take Loki back to Asgard. Once Loki leaves, we will completely know the whereabouts of the Tesseract. Hearing this, Steve also frowned. Although he was a little dissatisfied with Tony's behavior of rushing in without even making a plan, but since they were in the same camp now, the other party was his comrade. For his comrades, Steve would never just watch the other party fall into a dangerous situation. Without saying a word, Steve quickly picked up the parachute bag beside him and carried it on his back. Holding the shield in hand, he jumped out of the hatch. Team leader. Seeing Steve's disappearing figure, Phil Coulson couldn't help but have a flash of worry on his face. After all, he had personally seen Thor's strength before, BDCJ. Once there was a conflict with the other party, even if Tony and his idol teamed up, he was not sure in his heart that he could stop him. If something unexpected happens? Thinking of this, Phil Coulson immediately turned to look at Chen Luo and said hurriedly, Mr. Chen Luo, Thor? Don't worry. Chen Luo waved his hand and said with a smile, Thor is a bit reckless, but he won't kill people casually. Definitely, it's certain that he won't make a fatal move, but it's not certain whether he will take action. Anyway, in Chen Luo's view, with Thor and Tony's tempers, it is somewhat impossible for them to get along peacefully in this situation. On the contrary, It would be a good thing if they can get to know each other in advance through this action. Good thing. Although he thought so in his heart, Chen Luo would not express his thoughts. In order not to worry Phil Coulson, he slowly stood up and walked to the cabin door without looking back. Then I'll go over and have a look. Don't worry, Phil Coulson. Loki will be brought back soon. After saying that, Chen Luo moved his feet, and his body turned into a streak of blood and rose into the sky, disappearing into the night in the blink of an eye. Seeing Chen Luo rushing over, Phil Coulson was finally relieved this time. Since Chen Luo is on the side to hold the battle, I think both Tony and the captain can be brought back safely. On the other side, Thor flew Loki to the top of a deserted hill and dropped him to the ground. The body was hit with a huge force. Loki's face twisted, and he couldn't help but let out a cry of pain. Loki, where is the Tesseract? Loki opened his eyes and a smile appeared on his lips. It's been a long time since I saw you. Shut up, I'm not here to catch up with you. The smile on Loki's face got even bigger. Thor, I don't know how much energy my father used to teleport you to your beloved Earth after Bifrost was destroyed. You should thank me. Boom. With a dull, loud noise, Mjolnir hit the ground. Thor strode forward, pulled Loki up from the ground, and looked directly into his eyes, revealing a deep sadness in his eyes. Loki, I even thought you were dead. As if he understood the emotion conveyed in Thor's eyes, Loki's smile faltered, and he was silent for a moment before Taguchi said, You love me? We all mourn. Our father, it's your father. Loki stretched out his hand to interrupt, his face solemn. Breaking free from Thor's hands, Loki moved forward and moved his body without looking back. He has already told you, right? My true life experience. Hearing this, Thor fell into silence for a while, but soon he cheered up again and said, We were all raised by him. We grew up together and fought together. Have you forgotten all this? Loki's body stiffened, as if he had recalled something, and his face gradually softened a bit, but was soon enveloped in a deeper sadness. There is only a shadow in my heart. I have always lived in your shadow. I will never forget that it was you who threw me into the abyss. If it weren't for you, I would be the king of Asgard now. So you want to take over this world? To make up for your inexplicable inferiority complex? Thor looked serious. No, I will definitely use my own power to protect this planet. Protect? Loki smiled dumbly and looked at the other party coldly. Don't you know? How did they live in the past? Without our intervention, humans are still killing each other. If I were to rule them, there wouldn't be so many wars on this planet. You think you are stronger than humans? Thor shook his head, his eyes dark. You don't understand what domination is at all, brother. Have you forgotten what you did after you became the king? Hearing this, Loki's face suddenly darkened and he said, Thor, I am different now than before. I have seen a new world that you don't know. When I was exiled, I saw the true power of the Rubik's Cube. So when I can master the energy of the Rubik's Cube, Who showed you this? Who is controlling you behind the scenes? Tell me, Loki. Thor shouted in a deep voice, thunder flashing in his eyes. No one controls me. Loki is furious. He is the king. Stop dreaming. Thor grabbed his shoulders, his voice like thunder. Tell me, where is the magic city? Give it to me, Loki. Thor's expression gradually softened, and a glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes. Then follow me home. As soon as these words came out, Loki's face froze and he fell into silence again. Chapter 404, Part 1. After a moment, Loki looked at the man in front of him with a complicated expression, and the corners of his mouth slowly raised. The Rubik's Cube is not here with me, and I don't know where it is now. Don't waste your efforts, Thor. It's no use asking me. Loki really wasn't lying to him. Ever since he decided to be captured, he had already given instructions to Barton. Now, no one else knows the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube except Barton himself. The reason why he chose to do this was because Loki was worried that the human side might have some method of reading memory, so that he could read the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube from his mouth. Although he has not been on Earth for a long time, during the time when Thor came to live on Earth, Loki was always monitoring the temple, so he naturally knew something about the situation on Earth. It was as if the existence of the mutant clan was also noticed by him at this time. Through understanding, although with Loki's self-confidence, he does not think that there is anything in this race that can threaten his existence, the endless abilities of the other party still make him wary. If there is an ability that can read his memory, then his plan will fall short. What's more, even if there is no such clan, Loki will not forget that there is still the existence of Chen Luo, a powerful demigod on Earth. Through that brief confrontation, Loki can feel a breath of magic from Chen Luo's divine power. If Chen Luo also has the means to read memories, then he really has no confidence that he can resist it. It is precisely with these considerations in mind that Loki did not restrict Barton's movements, but allowed him to move freely, no matter where he was, as long as he could complete the tasks he assigned. That's enough. Hearing Loki's words, Thor frowned, thinking that Loki was lying. Loki, listen to me, quickly. However, just when he wanted to continue questioning, suddenly, a long flame streaked across the sky, and before Thor could react, it flew from his side in an instant and was about to go down the mountain. The next moment, watching Thor disappear from the same place, Loki came back to his senses. A trace of amusement flashed in his eyes, and he looked down the mountain. In the dense forest at the foot of the mountain, Tony trailed a long trail of flames behind him and crashed into it with Thor in his arms. Thor's body was pressed firmly to the ground, plowing a deep ravine in the ground. Finally, when Tony let go at this time, it even stopped after breaking several large trees in front of it that were as thick as an adult. But even so, such an attack did not cause any harm to Thor. He waved his hand to blow away the smoke and dust in front of him. Thor stood up slowly and looked at Tony in front of him and slowly raised his right hand. Immediately afterwards, accompanied by a whistling sound, a short hammer wrapped with thunder light flew from a distance and fell into Thor's palm. Iron Man, listen carefully. I don't want to fight you now, so you'd better be wise and leave by yourself. Want me to leave? Tony smiled. Easy, just give Loki to me. Mortal, do you know who you are talking to? Drama actor? Tony pointed at the cloak behind Thor and said teasingly, by the way, does your mother know that you voted for his cloak? Mind your own business, Tin Woodman. Thor sneered. Arcs of lightning flashed in his eyes. Loki is an Asgardian. Even if he does anything wrong, we should punish him, not you humans. Then I have to say sorry. Tony's eyes turned cold. The helmet instantly wrapped around his head, and a pair of blue electronic eyes lit up. I captured Loki. It's not up to you to decide how to deal with it. Hearing this, Thor curled up his lips and shook his head. It seems you are really unwilling to give up. In this case, if mortals want Loki, just come and get it yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, the next moment, Thor swung out the short hammer in his hand, quickly broke the air in front of him, and hit Tony directly in the chest. Boom! A dull metal collision sounded, and huge amounts of power struck. Tony flew backwards uncontrollably, breaking several big trees behind him, and finally the whole person was deeply embedded in a giant rock behind him. A humanoid hospital appeared behind it. Very good. Tony struggled to get up, looked forward, gritted his teeth, and whispered, You asked for this. Without saying a word, Thor took back Mjolnir. The short hammer rotated and danced in his hand, and thunder and lightning wrapped around it. Then, under Thor's divine power, dark clouds in the sky quietly condensed and took shape. Please give me flowers. Just when Thor was about to start attacking, the next moment, a thick laser flashed across Tony's chest. Before Thor could react, it instantly hit his chest and knocked him dozens of meters away. But such an attack still failed to cause any harm to Thor. Shaking his head, Thor stood up and looked in Tony's direction. A stern look flashed in his eyes. Boom! The next moment, Thor raised the Mjolnir in his hand, and a dazzling thunder light fell from the dark clouds in the sky, connecting with the Mjolnir in his hand. Immediately afterwards, Thor pointed the hammer at Tony, and the lightning on the hammer followed closely and instantly hit Tony's body. Zero dazzling sparks flew everywhere, and the powerful energy output brought about such a powerful impact that it was extremely difficult for Tony to even move a step, and he could only stand in place to resist. After a moment, as the lightning dissipated, although protective measures had been taken inside the battle suit, Tony could still feel a tingling sensation spreading throughout his body and bursts of thorns on his skin. Charging completed, the battery reaches 400%. However, the next moment, as the voice of JRVIS sounded, Tony's eyes suddenly lit up. Thank you, Inchang Xianchen. After saying this, before Thor could react, 3 laser beams shot out from Tony's chest and palms in an instant, synthesizing a more powerful laser cannon and hitting the target again. Caught off guard, Thor instantly flew backwards, breaking all the big trees behind him, and a deep ravine appeared on the ground. But it wasn't over yet. Tony moved his feet and flew forward quickly. In the blink of an eye, he caught up with Thor in front of him. Just like before, he pressed against him and flew towards a rock wall behind him, plowing deep holes into the rock wall. Fire is everywhere. Thor showed no sign of weakness, grabbed Tony's wrist with both hands, and gave it a firm squeeze. The next moment, under his terrifying grip, the steel armor on Tony's arm suddenly made a heartbreaking sound. The armor made of alloy began to bend and shapeshift, and several deep fingerprints appeared on the surface. Seeing this scene, Tony's face turned pale. Chapter 405, Part 1. This monster. Cursing secretly in his heart, Tony didn't dare to neglect. The laser emerged from his palm and quickly hit Thor's chest. Huge amounts of impact hit, forcing Thor to subconsciously loosen his hands and take a few steps back. Patting his chest casually, Thor grinned, put Mjolnir down casually, strode forward, waved his fists, and engaged in a close combat with the opponent. Bang bang bang. 2 iron fists hit Tony's steel battle suit one after another. Huge amounts of power exploded, and with dull sounds, Tony couldn't help but step back a few steps, unsteady, and fell to one knee on the ground. Chance. Thor's eyes lit up, and without saying a word, he stepped forward, grabbed the opponent's arms with both hands, and moved his feet to knock him to the ground. Seeing this scene, Tony suddenly felt a warning sign in his heart, and then he almost subconsciously leaned back and hit Thor's head with the helmet made of steel. After receiving this heavy blow, Thor's eyes suddenly dangled, but to Tony's surprise, it only took a few seconds for the other party to react again, and the smile on his face became brighter. Then, under Tony's shocked gaze, he also a headbutt was thrown out and hit him hard on the head. As Thor, who is expected to inherit the throne of God King of Asgard in the future, his physical strength is already comparable to Hulk, so Tony's attack just now naturally cannot cause any harm to him. On the contrary, because Thor is much stronger than the former, after being hit by Thor's headbutt, even if the head is protected by a helmet, it still cannot be completely isolated. Huge amounts of power move from the outside to the inside. Driving the helmet, they all began to vibrate slightly, causing Tony's mind to go blank. He rolled back uncontrollably a few times, struggled to get up, and shook his head. Tony felt that the scene in front of him began to become blurry, and it was obvious that his consciousness had not yet fully recovered. Thor strode forward, and Mjolnir was held in his hand again at some point. Looking at Tony, who had not yet recovered, he swung the hammer down unceremoniously. Hey! At this moment, a metal buckler suddenly shot out from the darkness in the distance and hit Thor's chest. Affected by this attack, Thor subconsciously took 2 steps back, frowned, and looked to the side. On top of a huge rock not far from the two of them, Steve appeared quietly above them at some point, looked at Tony and the two below, and said loudly, "Everyone stop it." After that, Steve jumped down, looked in Thor's direction and asked, "Thor, what are you here for?" "Definitely to stop Loki." "Then prove it to us." Steve looked at the hammer in Thor's hand. "Put the hammer down first." Tony, who had just recovered, stood up. When he heard these words, the corner of his mouth suddenly twitched. He had learned about Thor's deeds from Chen Luo, so he naturally knew what the hammer in his hand meant, and he wanted him to put down the weapon he regarded as his life. That would be as difficult as stealing him from Hulk, that pair of shorts that claimed to never get damaged. I was about to say something, but it was already too late. Upon hearing Steve's words, Thor's face darkened, his eyes sparkled with lightning, and a thunderous sound exploded from the air. "You want me to put down my hammer? Then let's give it a try." After that, Thor jumped up, and Mjolnir in his hand was instantly surrounded by countless thunder and lightning, making a series of harsh and sharp chirping sounds, and smashed it hard in the direction of Steve. Seeing this, Steve's eyes shrank, and without thinking, he immediately raised his shield for defense. Boom! The moment the two came into contact, a deafening roar sounded in the mountain forest, and the dazzling lightning spread rapidly in all directions, splitting all the surrounding trees and falling to the ground, raising smoke and dust all over the sky. At the same time, Thor only felt a huge amount of countershock force coming from the short hammer in his hand. The moment it hit him, Thor flew backwards for tens of meters uncontrollably and then fell heavily to the ground. As the smoke dissipated, Thor stood up again, patted the dust on his body, and looked forward with a trace of surprise in his eyes. In front of him, Steve slowly retracted the shield in his hand, his expression as normal, as if he had not been hurt in any way. Interesting. Thor's body surged with fighting spirit, and dazzling lightning surged out, wrapping around his body. At the same time, above his head, a dazzling lightning beam instantly fell from the sky and connected to his body, like a god who controlled thunder. "King, judge the world. I have to say, mortals, I recognize your strength. But even so, Luigi still can't be taken away by you. If you want to take away my brother, just step over me first. If you can do it, then come on. Let me see the strength of the strong men on earth." As soon as he finished speaking, dazzling thunder and lightning surged past, and madness began to spread in all directions. With Thor as the center, the dense thunder and lightning formed a thunder and lightning tide, surging towards the surroundings at a speed visible to the naked eye. Wherever the thunder tide passed, there were mountains, rocks, and trees. Everything was melted by the high temperature carried by the thunder and lightning, quickly dissipated and dissolved, and finally merged with this rich tide. Thunder! He raised Mjolnir to the sky in his hand, and the next moment, among the dark clouds in the sky, thunder and lightning shuttled through the clouds, and bursts of thunder traced long tracks in the sky, and then quickly fell towards the ground. Boom! As thunder and lightning fell from the sky, one of the lightning struck the big tree next to Steve instantly, splitting it in half in the blink of an eye. Then the high temperature brought by the thunder and lightning also ignited the big tree, turning it into a blazing ball. A huge fireball hit Steve in front. Seeing this scene, whether it was Steve or Tony, both of them shrank their eyes, and without thinking, they immediately ducked and started to avoid 5.3. Seeing the increasingly dense thunderstorms in the sky, and the thunder wave under his feet that was about to spread around him, the reactor in Tony's chest was running rapidly, and the flames raging under his feet were about to get up and fly into the sky to avoid it. Leave it to me. However, Thor, who had been prepared for a long time, how could he just watch the other party leave? With a flash of lightning in his eyes, he immediately controlled several bolts of lightning to fall from the clouds, and struck Tony instantly. Boom! Thunder and lightning struck Tony one after another. Although the battlesuit on his body can absorb the lightning for its own use, as the number of lightning increases, it can still cause damage to him when it exceeds the endurance range of the battlesuit. The power exceeds the endurance range. The power system is damaged by 5%. As the voice of JRVIS sounded, Tony's expression changed instantly. Chapter 406, Part 1. Not only Tony, but Steve on the other side is also in a desperate situation at this moment. Facing the thunder and lightning that kept falling from the sky, Steve, who was just a mortal, could only raise the shield in his hand to resist. Relying on this shield made of sound-absorbing steel, most attacks in this world cannot cause damage to it, even in the face of shockingly destructive lightning. Every time a bolt of lightning strikes the shield, the energy in it will be instantly absorbed by the shield and repulsed, turning into countless blue light points and dissipating. Under the protection of the shield, Steve not even a trace of harm was suffered. But this is only temporary. Although his shield can resist lightning attacks, at this moment, there is also a raging thunder wave approaching under his feet. Because the shield area is limited, he cannot take care of both ends. Once he is approached by the thunder wave, it is even more impossible to defend against it. Even if he keeps retreating at this moment, trying to avoid the thunder wave under his feet, but with his moving speed, before he even retreats a few meters, the thunder wave in front has quickly spread to his feet. Once it comes into contact with his body, with the terrifying high temperature carried by lightning, even Steve's physical fitness of Superman would be overwhelmed and melted by lightning in an instant. 13 At this critical moment, suddenly, a dazzling red light came from the sky, instantly attracting the attention of the three Tonys. This red light quickly began to condense, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge long sword that spanned the sky and the earth. It was hundreds of miles long, and it seemed to have life, and it slashed towards the dark clouds in the sky. The moment the long sword fell into the clouds, the thunder and lightning inside the dark clouds instantly began to riot. Countless lightning surges in it, violently striking at the long sword. The thunder roared loudly, as if it was going to be completely wiped out from the world. However, these lightning attacks have no effect on the long sword. On the contrary, whenever thunder and lightning fall on the sword, the energy contained in it is quickly absorbed into the sword and becomes the nourishment of the long sword, thus making it more powerful. It adds some power to it. The turbulent red light on the sword shone and shuttled through the clouds. In just a few blinks, it cut the dark clouds into countless pieces, and then gradually dissipated into the sky together with the long sword. Stop it! The next moment, as the air in front of Tony began to shake, Chen Luo appeared on the spot instantly, stepped forward, and walked in the direction of Thor with a calm face. Following his movements, the thunder wave under his feet was instantly absorbed by his body as soon as it came into contact, and could no longer expand even half a step forward. Finally, when Chen Luo came to Thor, the thunder wave that originally expanded dozens of meters away was completely absorbed. The dazzling thunder light gradually disappeared, and the mountain forest was once again covered by night. Stop it, Thor. Chen Luo looked at Thor calmly. Our purpose is the same. I can assure you that as long as the Rubik's Cube is retrieved, you can take Loki with you. Chen. Thor's face was serious and his eyes were solemn. Are you also on their side? No way. Chen Luo smiled. My friends are here. But I'm your friend too. Definitely. Chen Luo reached out and patted the other party's shoulder. In this case, you should join us. As long as I'm here, Loki will leave it to you sooner or later. After a pause, Chen Luo continued. Or are you saying you don't believe me? Thor's face froze, he shook his head. His face finally relaxed, and a smile appeared. I understand. Since I have your guarantee, Chen, I will go with you. But when the matter is resolved, I will take Loki away. No problem. Chen Luo nodded and agreed decisively. After finally comforting Thor, Tony and Steve slowly came to the two of them and looked Thor up and down. Tony shook his head, with an indescribable expression on his face. Seeing the expression on his face, Chen Luo also instantly understood what his friend was thinking. It's no wonder that, with Tony's always proud temperament, losing to Thor and Loki in one day was definitely a big blow to him, and it was inevitable that he would feel depressed. Although he understood what he was thinking, Chen Luo had no idea of stepping forward to comfort him. Based on his understanding of Tony, this setback was nothing to him. On the contrary, he would only hide this unwillingness in his heart, Thus it turns into the driving force to move forward, and finally explodes with unimaginable power. Driven by this power, it is expected that a new generation of steel battlesuits will be born in his hands soon. Sure enough, the emotion on Tony's face lasted no more than 10 seconds, then quickly disappeared and he regained his composure. Unlike Tony, Steve on the other side first nodded to Thor as a sign of friendship, then turned to look at Chen Luo and thanked him. Chen Luo, thank you very much this time. No need to thank me. Chen Luo waved his hand with a casual look on his face. Even if I didn't take action, Thor wouldn't hit you hard. If he really used all his strength just now, I wouldn't be able to stop him so easily. Regarding this point, Chen Luo is not without purpose. You must know that although his ability to convert energy can absorb various forms of energy in the universe, energy in the form of divine power cannot be absorbed into the body. The reason why he was able to absorb those thunder and lightning before was obviously that Thor did not use it, his own divine power, otherwise he would have to spend a lot of effort to solve it. Hearing this, the two of them were startled and subconsciously looked at Thor. Thor naturally had nothing to hide about this, so he nodded and said with a matter-of-fact expression, I'm just dealing with two mortals, there's no need for me to use my full strength. After a pause, Thor nodded affirmatively. 700 looked at the two of them. But your strength is indeed good. Even in Asgard, not many people can defeat you. Although Thor's emotional intelligence finally came online and he made urgent corrections, Tony's mood still didn't get much better, and instead became a little heavier. Unexpectedly, in the battle just now, Thor couldn't even use his full strength. This made the two of them feel heavy, and at the same time they had a new understanding of Thor's power. Especially Tony. After having a rough understanding of Thor's strength, he felt pressure in his heart, and at the same time secretly felt a greater motivation. It seems that the development of a new generation of battle suits is now on the agenda, Tony thought to himself. After reaching a settlement, several people took Loki to the top of the mountain and met Phil Coulson again. After seeing several people return safely and Loki also returning safely, Phil Coulson was also visibly relieved. Not daring to neglect, Phil Coulson quickly led a few people towards the base. Several hours passed, and early the next morning, several people finally arrived at their destination. With a slight shaking, when the plane gradually came to a stop, the cabin door slowly opened, and several people stepped off the plane one after another. Looking at the scene outside at this moment, Steve, who was here for the first time, had a flash of surprise in his eyes and subconsciously said, "What a big ship." Chapter 407, Part 1. This is SHIELD headquarters? Hearing this, Phil Coulson turned around, nodded, and said with a smile, "Yes, this place was just built some time ago. Speaking of which, I would like to thank Mr. Stark for his help. If it weren't for him, I don't know how long it will take to complete it." Everyone's eyes subconsciously moved to where Tony was. In response, Tony just nodded slightly, with an incomprehensible smile on his face. "I can only say that this place is not as simple as you think. As for what is there, you should take your time and see for yourself." Chen Luo shook his head, ignored the other party, and turned to look around. According to his observations, they were currently on an extremely huge aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier was about 2 kilometers long, and its deck was extremely wide. There were dozens or hundreds of aircraft parked on the runways, and there were several buildings standing around it. The tall buildings looked like a small city, so magnificent. In terms of scale alone, this aircraft carrier can be said to be the largest aircraft carrier he has ever seen. Even the various technologies contained in it have reached the top level. But this is not surprising. After all, this ship is a technological crystallization that has been built by a large number of top scientists from SHIELD. It took several years to build it. It far surpasses other aircraft carriers in all data. When the decision was made to build it, it was in order to make it the headquarters of SHIELD. But in addition to these data, there is another technology that allows this aircraft carrier to complete a qualitative change. According to the plan of SHIELD scientists, they originally wanted to equip this unprecedented giant aircraft carrier with a flight system, so that this aircraft carrier could achieve a qualitative change. Terrifying behemoths weighing hundreds of thousands of tons can escape from the shackles of the sea and fly into the sky. Once the flight ability is mastered, this aircraft carrier will truly reach its perfection and become the aerospace carrier they envisioned, giving it extremely high flexibility and concealment. Only by achieving this condition can this aircraft carrier truly serve as SHIELD. The headquarters is put into use. But it is a pity that because the weight of this aircraft carrier is too exaggerated, with the current technology of the Earth, it is impossible to build an engine that can carry flight. So this aircraft carrier has been idle. Until a few months ago, when Iron Man Tony was born, Fury was keenly aware of the opportunity through Tony's steel battle suit. After getting in touch with Tony, he actively invited him to come here and participate in the creation of the suit. The reason why the engine could not be built before was mainly due to energy problems, but this problem was nothing to Tony at that time. So after he got involved, it only took about a month. With the engine officially built, the aircraft carrier finally turned into metamorphosis. As the aerospace carrier was officially put into use, Fury also moved its headquarters here. From the moment it was put into operation, Chen Di and the others are still the first guests of this Chinese mothership. Under the leadership of Phil Coulson, several people walked all the way to the tallest building in front. As soon as they entered the door, they saw a familiar braised egg head walking towards them. He strode to Chen Luo and his group, looked at Chen Luo, Tony, and the others. Fury nodded and said, "Chen, Tony, thank you very much this time." They chatted with Chen Luo for a while, then turned to look at Thor aside. "Thor, I already know about Loki. I can promise you that when the matter here is resolved, the road base will be left to you to deal with." Thor stared at the other person for a long time, and then said, "You don't need to tell me this. If it weren't for Chen's guarantee, I wouldn't have brought Loki here." After saying this, Thor turned to look at Chen Luo and said in a low tone, "Chen, remember your promise. If anything happens to Loki, I won't be polite. Don't worry." Facing the other party's gaze, Chen Luo's face became serious, nodded, and responded. Seeing this, Fury didn't say anything, took a deep look at Chen Luo, and then led Chen Luo and his group towards the front. Boom. As a few people were moving forward, suddenly, the floor beneath their feet began to shake slightly. This change instantly attracted everyone's attention. "What's going on?" Steve asked with a puzzled look on his face. "Don't worry, everyone." Fury turned around and explained, "This is a normal phenomenon. This ship will cause some impact when it starts, but it will be fine soon." After hearing Fury's explanation, everyone looked at each other and fell silent. He came to a secret room and locked Loki in a special cage that had been prepared, because he had already learned from the other party that the other party did not know the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube. Although I don't know whether this news is true or false, it is obviously impossible to get the information I want from the other party. Coupled with the existence of Thor, it is also possible to use some means to force the other party to ask questions. It was risky, so they didn't stay here longer and decided to find other ways. Wait. Just as a few people were about to leave, Thor suddenly reminded him, "Just keep Loki here like this? Aren't you worried about him escaping?" "Don't worry." Fury smiled slightly, came to the console in front, and operated on the screen. Immediately afterwards, below the cage, the hatch suddenly opened, and strong airflow emerged from below. Looking down, a vast white cloud suddenly appeared in everyone's field of vision. If you want to escape, even if you scratch the glass just slightly, you will fall from an altitude of tens of thousands of meters with this iron cage. Chen Luo and his party looked down along the gap. When they saw the white scene below, and then thought of the vibration coming from the floor just now, Steve immediately reacted and understood what Tony's words were. What's the meaning? Today's technology is really advanced. Shaking his head, Steve sighed inwardly. This thing is well designed. In the cage, Kings, Loki nodded, with a slight arc on his lips. But to use this kind of thing against me, isn't it a bit overkill? If I look at it, this thing shouldn't be specially designed for me, right? As soon as these words came out, Fury's originally calm expression changed slightly. He looked at the other person deeply and did not answer Loki's question. But at this time, his reaction has already tacitly acknowledged something, and Chen Luo and the others on the side also understand this very well. Could it be? Looking at the cage in front of him, Tony seemed to have thought of something and subconsciously looked in the direction of Chen Luo. By coincidence, Chen Luo's eyes met with Tony's at this moment, and he nodded imperceptibly to Tony. Chen Luo did not express any opinion, but chose to remain silent. Seeing Chen Luo's reaction, Tony suddenly understood and didn't say anything else. Chapter 408, Part 1. However, although Tony did not speak, inside the cage, Loki would not let go of such an opportunity. His eyes flashed and he spoke again. "Oh, I heard that a violent beast suddenly appeared on this planet some time ago, right? It is said that he pretends to be an ordinary person on weekdays, but no matter how much he pretends, it can't change the fact that he is a beast at heart." Having said this, Loki turned to look at Chen Luo aside, and the smile on his face began to become more and more obvious. "Oh, yes. I remembered it, Mr. Chen Luo. The beast seems to be at your place now, right? Even if you have to build this iron cage, it seems that the director is not very confident about you. Maybe besides this cage, he also secretly made some weapons against you?" While Loki was speaking, the mind of the scepter, who was also brought into the headquarters at this moment, began to glow faintly at this moment. As soon as Loki said these words, Fury's face instantly turned extremely ugly, but arguing with him at this time had no effect. He quickly turned around, looked at Chen Luo and explained, "Chen, please believe me, we at D 860 have always regarded you as our partner and have absolutely no plans against you." Although Fury denied the plan against Chen Luo, he did not know whether it was intentional or unintentional. He did not give a reply as to whether the cage behind him was aimed at Hulk Fury. "Ah." Loki sneered with unknown meaning, stared at Fury's back, and continued to speak unhurriedly. Sir Director, does the feeling of falling short make you unhappy? After I take away the Rubik's Cube, you can't continue your research, right? It's clear that we're almost able to get the energy of the Rubik's Cube, the energy that never ends. Loki's eyes were dark and shimmering with a strange light, as if he could see through people's hearts, which made Fury's heart suddenly tighten. So, what exactly are you going to do with the Rubik's Cube star? Let all mankind benefit? Let mankind no longer be restricted by energy issues from now on? No, neither. Having said this, Loki turned to look at Chen Luo and his group, smiled and said, "Everyone, I think you all have the answer in your mind about what the director wants." Loki. Fury's face suddenly darkened, and with his remaining one eye staring at the opponent, a deep voice sounded, "What about you? Why did you steal the Rubik's Cube? You said before that you want to conquer this planet, right? But you can't do it just by relying on your own strength. So your purpose of getting the Rubik's Cube is already obvious. You want to use the energy of the Rubik's Cube to open the space channel and then let others come over, right? What you really want is to start a war that will sweep the world. Compared to your ambition, what am I worth?" Listening to Fury's analysis, Loki did not deny it. Instead, he nodded in agreement and said with a matter-of-fact expression, "You're right. But so what? I have never concealed my purpose, but unlike some people, I even have to conceal what I have done." The atmosphere in the stadium suddenly became silent. Fury stared at the opponent with cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Although he couldn't see the expressions of Tony and others at the moment, he could clearly feel the scorching glances coming from behind him. Even if he had never faced them directly, Fury felt a huge amount of emotion rising in his heart at this moment. Pressure. After taking a deep look at the other party, Chen Luo's eyes flashed. He looked away and said calmly, "Let's go. We can't ask anything from Loki now, so we'd better find a way to find the Rubik's Cube first." After hearing this, everyone finally came to their senses, nodded one after another, and then followed Chen Luo towards the door. After Chen Luo and his party left, Fury finally breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't want to say anything more to Loki, turned around and left the place in a hurry. Looking at the figures leaving, Biff, an inexplicable smile slowly appeared on Loki's face, and then, an imperceptible voice sounded in the secret room. "It's about to begin." Under the leadership of Phil Coulson, several people came to a large conference room. When Fury arrived later, before Tony could ask anything, he took the lead and said, "Everyone, the most important thing for us now is to find a way to find Chun-Ling. Except for this, we can talk about everything else later, okay?" Several people looked at each other, and after seeing that Chen Luo didn't express anything, Tony also gave up his intention to ask, shrugged, and said with a smile, "I have no objection." Seeing that no one else expressed objections, Fury felt relieved, and then quickly said, "Everyone, this is what I think. If we want to find the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube, we may need to find a researcher who is proficient in gamma ray positioning. After our previous research, we found that the energy of the Rubik's Cube contains strong traces of gamma rays, so if we can find which area emits the strongest gamma rays, we might be able to find traces of the Rubik's Cube." Hearing Fury's analysis, Tony nodded. Then he seemed to think of something and subconsciously turned to look at Chen Luo. "Chen, I remember Dr. Banner seemed to." Chen Luo nodded, looked in the direction of Fury and smiled. "If you don't mind, Fury, there's no problem with me." Fury looked as usual and said, "Actually, I think so too. If there is anyone in the world who has the deepest research on gamma rays, it must be Dr. Banner. With his help, I think we will be able to find the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube soon." Since Fury said so, Chen Luo would definitely not refuse. With a thought in his mind, he disappeared in an instant. After a while, when Chen Luo appeared again, Banner's figure also appeared next to him. When bringing him here, Chen Luo had already told him everything about the situation here. After listening to Chen Luo's narration, Banner nodded and agreed without any further hesitation. When he arrived at the headquarters, he greeted Tony and others. Although he was a little surprised by the identities of Steve and Thor, he quickly regained his composure. After entering working mode, Banner thought for a moment, and then immediately made his request to Fury. "Bring me enough spectrometers, the more the better. I need to collect enough data to analyze more accurate results." Fury will definitely not refuse this, and will satisfy all Banner's requirements, just hoping to find the location of the Rubik's Cube as soon as possible. It has been some time since the Rubik's Cube was stolen. Once the energy of the Rubik's Cube is successfully channeled, what they are about to face may not be just Loki. Soon, when everything was ready, Banner quickly got into work mode and planned to start research. But just as he was about to leave, Fury suddenly reached out and stopped him. "Wait a minute, Banner. I have one more thing that requires your participation." Chapter 409, Part 1. Hearing this, Banner stopped, turned around, and looked at the other person with some confusion. "Anything else?" Fury glanced at Chen Luo and his party, was silent for a moment, and then said, "Everyone, although Dr. Banner has planned to start looking for the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube, there is still the possibility of an unexpected H. Once we can't find the location of the Rubik's Cube, or it's too late when we find the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube, then we have to take the necessary precautions. Having said this, Fury's eyes narrowed, his face was serious, and he slowly spoke out his proposal. So I think it is necessary for us to form a temporary team. Once an emergency occurs, we can respond in time and not be too passive. And every member of this team must have a combat power that far exceeds that of ordinary people. Otherwise, I'm afraid they won't be able to deal with the opponents they may face in the future. The name of this team, I named it Avengers. And you are the most suitable members for this team, the Avengers? Upon hearing this, several people looked at each other and fell into silence. Chen Luo and Tony, needless to say. For Steve, if it had been before what Loki said just now, maybe he would have definitely nodded in agreement, but after hearing the other party's analysis, although he felt I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't help but feel a little concerned about Fury's proposal. Thor said nothing and did not speak first. Instead, like Banner, he moved his gaze to Chen Luo aside, wanting to hear his opinion. For Banner, Chen Luo is not only kind to him, but also based on his relationship with the monster in his body, even if he agrees to join. If Chen Luo refuses, when Hulk appears to participate in the battle, which side will he take? But it's hard to say. Thor's reason is also very simple. As a fighting maniac, Chen Luo, who is also a demigod, naturally deserves his respect, especially when he heard from Heimdall that Chen Luo had gone to Jotunheim and killed a giant of Jotunheim with his own hands. This is especially true for the demigod queen. In addition to the strength factor, the relationship between him and Chen Luo is obviously much better than that of Fury, so he is naturally more inclined to Chen Luo's opinion. It can be said that everyone present, except Steve, Chen Luo and the other four are in the same camp, and these people are all powerful beings far beyond ordinary people, and they are the focus of Fury's plan this time. If Chen Luo and others do not agree with their plan, then this team called Avengers will undoubtedly not be successfully formed. Chen Luo naturally felt the gazes of Thor and the others. He looked at Tony and Tony nodded tacitly, understanding instantly. Director Nick Fury, I admit that your proposal is indeed a good one. If we want to deal with the possible alien war, gathering cutting-edge combat forces and using it as a sharp sword to counterattack the enemy forces will indeed have many advantages. Small effect. In principle, we definitely agree with your proposal, but I still have some questions about some of the details. Upon hearing this, Fury did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to look at Chen Luo. When he saw Chen Luo's smiling expression, he understood something in his heart and said in a deep voice, "Any questions? We are not interested in anything else, but there is only one thing I want to confirm with you." Tony looked at the other party with a smile on his face, pondered for a moment, and then asked, "That is this Avengers organization managed by SHIELD, or is it managed and run by ourselves?" As soon as these words came out, Fury couldn't understand what Tony meant, and he let out a long sigh. To be honest, the reason why he made this proposal before was to take this opportunity to mark Chen Luo and others with the SHIELD mark, especially Chen Luo, who has a powerful combat power that can rival Apocalypse Thor. Once he can be mastered by them, even if there is any alien war invasion in the future, he will be quite confident to deal with it. But it is precisely because he understands how terrifying Chen Luo's power is that he has never dared to carry out any methods on Chen Luo. Instead, he has always been on good terms with the other party to ensure that he can survive when encountering danger. Chen Luo was contacted to come to the rescue. Now this Loki incident is also an attempt on his whim. If under the pressure from Loki, he can completely bring Chen Luo, a powerful fighter, into their shield, it will undoubtedly be a breakthrough for the power of shield. A huge improvement. But at the same time, Fury also considered the possibility of failure in this matter. With Chen Luo's fighting power, he was unwilling to antagonize him anyway, so he refused to join their side and chose another one. When setting up a family, I was also mentally prepared. Please give me flowers. Now the threat from Loki's side is approaching day by day. As long as the Rubik's Cube is not found for a day, they will face the risk of approaching war at any time. Therefore, in this situation, whether the Avengers are in his hands is not the most important. The most important thing is, the Earth now needs the help of the Avengers. If before Loki's words, he still had some confidence that he could convince everyone, but after that, Fury knew that Tony and the others did not trust him as much as before. If I reject Tony's proposal, the formation of the Avengers will be far away. This situation is undoubtedly not a good thing for the approaching crisis. A decision must be made as soon as possible. After thinking about this, Fury immediately made a decision in his mind. Looking at Tony, Fury nodded heavily and said solemnly, "I understand what you mean. In that case, the Avengers team, SHIELD, will not interfere in the management. As long as this team is formed, there will be a cooperative relationship between it and SHIELD in the future. There will be no distinction between superior and inferior." Hearing Fury's assurance, a smile appeared on Tony's face and he nodded with satisfaction. "Then I have no problem." After saying this, Tony turned to look at Chen Luo with an inquiring look in his eyes. Seeing this, Chen Luo finally said, "In that case, please excuse me, Director. We need to discuss the specific matters regarding the formal formation of Avengers." After hearing this, Fury also understood that he was no longer suitable to stay here. He nodded and exited the room, leaving the place to Chen Luo and others. "Chun, I'm going to work first." After Banner said this, he turned around and walked towards the equipment that had been prepared. "The reason why I chose to do this is also very simple. No matter what Chen Luo's final decision is, he will choose to stand with Chen Luo. So in this case, it doesn't matter whether he participates in the discussion or not. The same goes for Thor. So in the end, the only person who needs convincing is the last person B." Chapter 410, Part 1. "Captain, what do you think?" Chen Luo turned to look at Steve and asked with interest. "If we are going to face an alien war, then we really need an elite team as the vanguard. From this perspective, I think it is indeed necessary to form an Avengers team." First he affirmed Fury's proposal, and then Steve seemed to have thought of something and said hesitantly, "But if we were to manage this organization by ourselves, we might not have enough ability." Before he finished speaking, Tony on the side stretched out his hand and interrupted, "Wait a minute, Captain. You don't need to worry about the rest. Whether it's funds, connections, or even bases, Chon and I can solve them. You don't need to worry about these." Steve paused, looked at Chen Luo and Tony, and immediately reacted. Yes, those worries he had before were not a problem in front of these two people. With the information provided by SHIELD, he naturally knew how much power these two people held in their hands. It is no exaggeration to say that with the combined power of the two of them, even if they are head-on with the country they are in at the moment, it is extremely easy to maintain the operation of an organization. Then I have no objection. Wanting to understand this, Steve didn't hesitate and nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Tony showed a satisfied smile on his face, looked at everyone, looked at Chen Luo, nodded slightly and said, "In this case, after Banner has finished processing and found the location of the Rubik's Cube, Chun and I will take everyone to see our base. It just so happens that the Avengers are gathering this time, and we can also take you to meet the other members in advance." "Partner. Wait." After hearing this, Steve opened his eyes and looked at the two of them in disbelief. "The base? Could it be that you have actually?" Banner, who was playing with instruments on the side, subconsciously raised his head and looked at the two of them in surprise. It was obvious that Tony's news just now was somewhat unexpected. Facing the somewhat surprised looks from the two of them, Tony smiled proudly and without explaining much, just said, "You will understand this when you go to the base with me. I believe you will not be disappointed there." Seeing that Tony had no intention of explaining, the two of them regained their composure after being surprised, suppressed their curiosity in their hearts, nodded, and had no intention of asking any more questions. Sitting in front of the console, watching Loki's figure appear on the virtual screen on the stage, Steve thought for a while, raised his head and looked in the direction of Thor. "Thor, tell me, what is Loki's plan?" His high-quality troops are from the Chitauri. They are not Asgardians and do not belong to the forces within the 9 realms. Thor had already learned about the relevant information from Loki, and he introduced it to everyone with a solemn face. "Loki plans to lead this army to attack the Earth, and they will definitely help him. And I think the condition for his help is probably the Tesseract." "An army from outer space?" Steve's face also turned solemn, his brows furrowed, and he said nothing. "So, he wanted to use the Rubik's Cube to open the portal?" Banner looked up with a look on his face. "That's why Agent Barton took Dr. Sylvig away when he defected." "Sylvig?" Thor's heart moved and his face darkened. "He is my friend. Damn it. Is he even involved?" "This is not the point, guys." Tony suddenly spoke. Looking at the figure of Loki in the cage on the screen, his eyes flashed slightly, and he said thoughtfully, "Have you ever thought about the matter of capturing Loki? Are things going a little too smoothly for us?" Speaking of this, Tony turned to look at Chen Luo and analyzed seriously. If I remember correctly, Loki should have fought against Chen Luo and understood the strength gap between him and Chen. Since Chen exists here, why did he appear there so arrogantly before? I feel like he was captured by us on purpose. As soon as these words came out, the whole audience fell into silence. Steve thought about it for a while. His eyes became more confused, and he said, "Speaking of which, if Loki is in our hands now, even if the alien army really invades the Earth, how should he command them? I think it's better that we don't focus on Loki right now. As far as I'm concerned, that guy is a lunatic. It's not surprising that a lunatic would do something incomprehensible." Banner shrugged and said without any scruples. He understood what he thought about Loki. But while he was saying this, he subconsciously forgot that there was another Asgardian in this room. "Watch your words, mortal." Thor turned his head and glared at the other party. "Loki is indeed unreasonable, but he is an Asgardian, my brother. I will not allow you to say what he says." "Really?" Tony suddenly interrupted with a smile on his face. "But not long ago, your brother killed a lot of people." Thor was silent for a while, then quickly changed his words. He was adopted. I think their plan may be related to metal iridium, but what do they need iridium for? At this time, Banner, who had been playing with the instrument, seemed to have discovered something. His eyes lit up and he subconsciously said, "Wait, metal iridium?" After hearing Banner's words, Tony's heart skipped a beat. His brain was running rapidly, and he quickly came to a conclusion in just a blink of an eye. I understand. He wants to use iridium as a stabilizer. With the existence of this metal, the new portal can remain stable for a long time. If the portal can exist for a long time, then the Chitauri army will continue to be reinforced through the portal, and then they will be able to use enough troops to invade the Earth. Banner also reacted immediately. The moment Tony finished his analysis, he immediately revealed Loki's plan. If you want the portal to last longer, in addition to this metal, you also need a high-density energy body to activate the Rubik's Cube, Tony said while looking at the screen in front of him. With the Barton agent's ability, it shouldn't be difficult to get this kind of metal, but I don't understand this kind of high-density energy body. What is he looking for to replace it? Banner looked at him in astonishment and asked doubtfully, "Shouldn't this be knowledge that only thermonuclear astrophysicists should know?" "Tony, how do you know so clearly?" "I've been studying for a while since last night." Tony waved his hand with a calm look on his face. "So, Loki needs some kind of special power source, and then 2.5 uses it to activate the Rubik's Cube, right? He needs to at least heat the temperature of the Rubik's Cube to over 100 million degrees to meet the theoretical requirements." Banner expressed his opinion with a serious face. "Unless Dr. Sylvig can find some way to stabilize the quantum tunneling effect." Tony also expressed his opinion. "If he can do it, he can make any reactor on the Earth achieve ion fusion." Seeing the two people communicating with each other using terms they didn't understand at all, everyone present looked confused and had questions in their heads. "Wait." Chen Luo couldn't help but interrupt. "You should leave these discussions for later. Now we just want to know, besides the Rubik's Cube, what else does Loki need to implement his plan?" Upon hearing this, the two looked at each other and shook their heads. "Have no idea." Chen Luo. Chapter 411, Part 1. In the laboratory prepared by Fury for Banner and Tony. The gamma reading on the scepter is the same as Dr. Sylvig's report on the Rubik's Cube. Banner held the radiation detection instrument in his hand and said while scanning the mind scepter in front of him, "But it may take a few weeks to process." On the other side, Tony looked at the screen in front of him, his hands constantly operating on it, and he said without looking back, "Bypass the main system of SHILD and enter the subsystem group. This can accelerate it to 600 trillion floating point operations per second." "What a great idea." Banner's eyes lit up and he said, "If it succeeds, it should save a lot of time." Tony turned around and came to Banner, looking at him with some admiration. "To be honest, if you don't mind, you can come to my place and give it a try. The top 10 floors of the Stark building are laboratories, and they will definitely satisfy you." "Request." "Thanks, but forget it." Banner raised his head and smiled. "I'm having a good time here with Chen. No matter what experiments I want to do, I have the final say. The most important thing is that even if the big guy in my body gets restless, Chen can help me calm him down. So whether it's for my safety or everyone's safety, it's more appropriate for me to stay there." "Don't say that, Dr. Banner." Tony waved his hand and said, "You must know that you are a normal person. You also have your own life. You can't stay in the laboratory from now on, right? I think it wouldn't be a bad thing for you to adapt to life in the outside world in advance." With that said, Tony slowly walked behind Banner, looking at the capacitive pin in his hand. A different kind of luster flashed in his eyes. "If you want to come and visit me, I'm always welcome. Don't worry, I won't put any pressure on you, make you nervous, or have any accidents." Gee. The next moment, the arc of the tip of the capacitive pin flashed, and then gently touched Banner's body. A weak electric current instantly flowed through Banner's body. Although it did not cause any harm to him, it still made his muscles tense and his hair stood on end. He couldn't help but let out an exclamation. Banner turned to look at Tony, frowning slightly, not understanding the meaning of what he just did. "Huh? No reaction?" Seeing Banner's reaction, Tony blinked and suddenly had a new understanding of Banner's psychological quality. "Hey, Tony, are you crazy?" At this time, Steve, who had just walked into the laboratory, saw this scene. His face changed, and his brows frowned subconsciously. "It has nothing to do with you." Tony ignored the other party, continued to look at Banner and praised, "You can still hold back. It seems that your self-control ability is good. Is there any secret? Listen to music, do yoga, or take some medicine. Are you always so dishonest?" Steve couldn't help but speak again. "Don't you know that what you just did may threaten everyone's safety?" Having said this, Steve turned to look at Banner with a hint of apology on his face. "No offense, Dr. Banner." "Oh, it doesn't matter." Banner smiled and waved his hands, showing no concern on his face. "If I couldn't stand such a little excitement, I wouldn't get on the boat. You're too nervous, Banner. You can relax a little. Tony patted Banner on the shoulder and said with a smile. Steve turned to look at Tony, suppressing the anger in his heart, and said in a deep voice, Mr. Stark, I think you should focus on solving the current problem. Do you think I haven't? Tony took out the snacks he brought from nowhere and said while eating, You heard what Loki said just now. Do you think Fury is hiding something from us? Aren't you curious? Perhaps when we know the truth, those problems will be solved? You know, he is the king of agents. He must have hidden a lot of secrets. Speaking of this, Tony looked in the direction of Banner. Dr. Banner feels the same as me, right? Banner hesitated for a moment. I still have work to do. Dr. Banner. Seeing the avoidance in Banner's mouth, Steve stared straight at him, his face full of seriousness. Facing the other party's gaze, there was silence for a moment. Banner sighed softly. Do you still remember what Loki said just now? Let all mankind no longer be restricted by energy issues from now on. Tony, I remember that there is a newly built arc reactor in your building, right? With the energy of that reactor, how long can it be self-sufficient to run the building? A year or more. It's just an old thing built before. Tony shrugged, his face full of confidence. But there's still no problem in keeping the building running for a year. Captain, maybe you don't understand. Banner looked in Steve's direction. Tony's position in the world's energy field is well-deserved now. Since Tony has such accomplishments in the energy field, why didn't director Nick Fury think of inviting Taz Hong to participate in the Magic City project? If he really wanted to benefit all mankind. Unless he wants to use the Rubik's Cube energy elsewhere. So I think we need to investigate. Tony then answered, As early as the moment I arrived on this ship, I tried to crack the internal program. Once my program successfully invaded SHIELD's confidential files, then I can know all the hidden secrets of SHIELD. Wait, you want to hack into the program here? Steve looked at the other party seriously. So if SHIELD doesn't recruit you to join the Rubik's Cube project, you won't be able to figure it out, right? That's right. Tony nodded firmly. Don't you find it strange that intelligence agencies are afraid of smart people? I think the reason why Fury didn't let me join may be because he was worried that I would find out his real plan 977. Why do you think there's something wrong with director Nick Fury? Couldn't this be Loki's plot? Steve did not show any weakness and expressed his thoughts. I think Loki just wants us to be suspicious of each other. He is planning to start a war. If we can't concentrate, then he will succeed. We are on the same boat now. If we are suspicious of each other, it will only give the enemy a chance to sneak in. Tony shrugged and said, I admit that what you said makes sense, but proper precautions are also necessary. If we don't make any preparations, we will be the ones who suffer in the end. Seeing that Tony was so ignorant, Steve's face darkened, and he suddenly became more dissatisfied with the former, and said without thinking, So you just want to be in the limelight, right? For this reason, you would rather risk breaking up with S.H.I.E.L.D. Huh? Tony smiled and looked at the other person with some confusion. By the way, who among the people in this room is walking around in gorgeous costumes, and it's useless at all? By the way, Captain, don't you really feel a little uncomfortable wearing this clothes? Banner also looked at the other party with some confusion. Steve's face froze, and after saying, Find the Rubik's Cube as soon as possible, he ignored the two of them and turned around and walked out the door. Arriving outside the gate, recalling Tony's words just now, Steve thought for a while. His heart moved, and he strode towards somewhere ahead alone. Chapter 412, Part 1. By the way, did my dad really like him that much back then? Looking at the other person's leaving figure, Tony said unhappily, I think we should consider freezing him back. Banner smiled, but his judgment about Loki was right. Loki does have some purpose for us. What does that matter? Tony's face was full of confidence. Even if he can really bring some alien troops to the Earth, we may not lose to him. Then I'll just wait and see. Tony looked at the screen in front of him. At this moment, he seemed to suddenly think of something and suggested, Or, you can go to the battlefield with us. With the power of that big guy in your body, I think it can play a big role. Forget it. Banner shook his head and refused. It might be okay if there are fewer people, but if it's a battle like an alien invasion, I'm worried that Hulk will not be able to control his temper in the end and go berserk. That would be troublesome. This is indeed a problem. Hearing Banner's answer, Tony frowned, and his mind couldn't help but recall the battle at the Hammer Industry exhibition. At that time, under the harassment of the armors controlled by Ivan, Hulk was already at risk of losing control. If the other party had not separated from him in the end, once Hulk fell into a state of rage, he had no confidence that he could bring back the other party's sanity. But there's nothing to worry about. Tony's eyes flashed, and he said with a smile, Even if you really lose control in the end, isn't there still that guy Chen? With him, there won't be any problems. Banner was stunned and subconsciously recalled Chen Luo's figure in his mind. He couldn't help but nodded without making any further rebuttal. On the other side, after searching inside the mothership for a moment, Steve finally stopped in front of a seemingly hidden door. Because the location is too remote, there is no flow of people here, and there are no guards in front of the gate, making the place look a bit ordinary and unattractive. But in Steve's eyes, precisely because this place was so ordinary, it seemed to him that it felt intentional. Looking at the door in front of him, Steve turned around and looked around. After making sure that no one was passing by, he opened the door and strode in. This is, however, when he saw clearly what was stored behind the door. Steve's eyes narrowed and his face suddenly darkened. This secret room where Loki is. The door opened, and Natasha Romanoff walked in. Sensing the movement behind him, Loki slowly turned around and looked behind him. Is it you? Seeing the person coming, a smile appeared on Loki's face. He came to the other person and looked down at him through the glass in front. I remember you. Let me think about it. Are you right? Looking at Loki's face, Natasha Romanoff's expression changed slightly. Did you already guess that I would come? That's definitely. Loki's eyes flashed, and he asked with a smile. So, why are you here this time? I want to know what you did to Barton. Oh, do you mean Barton agent? Loki suddenly realized, I just broadened his mind, that's all. Hearing Loki's answer, Natasha Romanoff's face moved slightly and she stared at the other person closely. So, what will happen to Barton's mind after you get what you want? Oh, it sounds like you have an unusual relationship with him. What, you like him? Romanoff agent? You are thinking too much. Natasha Romanoff said with a cold face. I just owe him a favor. Loki took a few steps back, came to one side and sat down, and said with great interest, how about telling me, what exactly do you owe him? Hearing this, Natasha Romanoff's eyes flashed slightly, her lips moved slightly, and she hesitated to speak. After a while, she seemed to have finally made up her mind, sat down on one side, and began to tell her story to the other party. Before I joined S.H.I.E.L.D., I used to work for some people or organizations. At that time, I didn't care who the employer was. I never had any idea about the goals of each mission. Seat. Until one day S.H.I.E.L.D. knew of my existence and sent Barton to kill me. But when he found me, he didn't do that. Instead, he invited me to join S.H.I.E.L.D. This is my second chance. He pulled me out of the abyss, so I owe it to him. Hearing this, Loki thought for a while and then said, if I let him go in the end, what can you do for me? I won't let you out. Interesting. Hearing the other party's answer, Loki's mouth curved slightly, his eyes were deep, as if he could see through people's hearts. Agent Romanoff, do you know what kind of person you are? Do you think I will really believe that you are just returning a favor? Things are not as complicated as you think. Natasha Romanoff looked calm. I owe him this, so I have to pay him back. It's that simple. Really? Then can you repay all the blood debts you owe? Loki's smile became even weirder. I know everything you have done. As soon as these words came out, Natasha Romanoff's calm expression suddenly changed suddenly. Her eyes trembled slightly, as if she was caught in some kind of memory, and her body began to tremble unconsciously, making her whole person visibly lie. Agent Romanoff, you have too many blood debts. So do you think that saving a person who is no more noble than you can change anything? This is the lowest level of compassion. It's simply childish, ridiculous, and so sad. You have spent your whole life in lies, with your hands stained with blood, working for liars and killers. You think you are noble, you think you have your own rules, and you think this can offset your own. But that's who you are. It will never, ever go away. Slowly stood up and came to Natasha Romanoff. The smile on Loki's face became more and more crazy and evil, and his deep voice was like a demon whispering, guiding the soul to gradually sink into the abyss. I'm not going to do anything to Barton. At least not yet. Until you let him kill you, you know, he knows everything about your fear. So I will give him long enough to let him know what he, Zhao Zhao, has done, and wait until he regrets it. In time, I will smash his head. This is my reply to you. Are you satisfied with this answer? Seeing Loki's expression at this moment, Natasha Romanoff's eyes began to tremble violently. Finally, when she couldn't control the fear in her heart, she turned around and walked quickly towards the door. Her footsteps hurried. I can't wait to escape from here. Arriving at the gate, Natasha Romanoff paused, breathing rapidly, gritting her teeth and trembling. You monster! Ah! Hearing the other party's answer, Loki smiled even more, his eyes gleaming with excitement, and he laughed and replied, No, then you are wrong. The real monster hasn't appeared yet. As soon as she finished speaking, Natasha Romanoff's body stopped shaking instantly. So this is your goal. Turning around, her face had already returned to calm. Hulk, he is your goal. That's right, right? Hearing this, Loki's expression changed instantly. Chapter 413, Part 1. You lied to me? Looking at the other person's expression, Loki finally reacted. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and he gritted his teeth and whispered, Thank you so much this time. A smile appeared on Natasha Romanoff's face, and she said softly, "If you hadn't actively cooperated, I wouldn't have known your goals so quickly." After getting the information she wanted, Natasha Romanoff was not in the mood to continue chatting with Loki. She immediately reported the information she knew to headquarters through the headset, and at the same time walked faster towards the laboratory where Banner was located. Although she already knows Loki's goal, she still doesn't know what he will do to Banner. But what is certain is that since the opponent's target is Banner, once the opponent succeeds and the monster in Banner is completely released, the mothership they are on will be in danger. So the best way at the moment is to let Banner leave here first, so as to prevent him from being used by Loki, and secondly, to prevent the headquarters from being damaged. For the current situation, this is undoubtedly the best solution. Looking at Natasha Romanoff's disappearing back, the ferocious look on Loki's face gradually faded away. The corner of his mouth raised a slight arc, and a subtle and unobservable voice sounded quietly. "It's about to begin," the other sighed. In the main cockpit of the mothership, Thor had just finished talking to Phil Coulson, with a smile on his face. "Phil Coulson, thank you very much this time." After learning the whereabouts of his girlfriend from Phil Coulson, although he was a little disappointed that she was too far away from him now, he couldn't help but feel relieved when he thought that a war would probably happen next. "You're welcome, Thor." Phil Coulson had a warm smile on his face and a gentle tone that made people feel good about him. "We are friends." Looking at the happy scene of the two people below, Fury nodded slightly, very satisfied with this. Following Loki's words before, Fury could clearly feel that Tony and the others no longer trust him as much as before, and this distrust will undoubtedly be of no benefit to their future cooperation. So if they can have someone like Phil Coulson, it is a good thing for both parties to have someone who gets along well with Tony and the others as a bond. Especially at this critical juncture, Fury does not want to give Loki a chance because of any internal conflicts between them. If they can continue to cooperate smoothly like this and successfully find the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube, then they will not have any problems. Additional losses. As long as war can be avoided, it is the greatest success for them. Thinking of this, Fury couldn't help but look at Phil Coulson with a little more encouragement. However, at this moment, on the screens behind him, a burst of rapid sirens sounded, instantly attracting his attention. The system is being compromised. Dazzling red fonts appeared on the screen. Seeing the above prompts, Fury's face changed, as if he thought of something, his brows instantly furrowed. "Tony." In the laboratory, Chen Luo pushed open the door and entered. "How was the research? Did you gain anything?" Arriving in front of Tony, Chen Luo asked. "That's definitely." Looking at the screen in front of him, Tony's eyes flashed. The corner of his mouth raised a slight arc, and he smiled. "And this harvest is a bit beyond our expectations." "Huh, what do you say?" Tony pointed at the screen in front of him, his face full of expected confidence. "Just like what I said before, Fury is indeed hiding something from us. Chen, Banner, look, here is." Boom. Just when he was about to introduce it, the door opened again, and then Steve strode into the house, put the things he found on the table and said, "What do you think this is?" Chen Luo and others subconsciously turned their heads to look, and saw a strange-looking firearm placed on the table at the moment. It was completely black and had a cold metallic luster on the surface. It looked like future technology, and it was different from what is available on the market today. There are huge amounts of differences among the weapons circulating on the internet. "I found this from a secret warehouse." Steve's face was heavy. "Maybe you have never seen this kind of firearm, but it is not unfamiliar to me." After a pause, he continued, "I saw this kind of weapon during the battle with Hydra. "You mean, this is the kind of energy weapon Hydra used at that time?" Tony's eyes flashed and he said suddenly. Steve nodded and glanced at Tony. "Banner, I won't use your method to find the answer, but I have my own way." "Uh-huh." Tony snorted lightly and said nothing. Obviously, Steve's words were also his response to Tony's previous statement that he was of no use at all. He wanted to refute it, but after seeing the evidence obtained by the other party, Ginny finally endured it. At the same time, the door opened again, and then Fury hurried in, came to Tony, and said with a stern face, "Tony, what do you mean? Why hack into the headquarters system? Why?" Tony twitched the corner of his mouth, looked behind the other person, and said with a smile, "Mr. Director, did you know when you looked back?" Hearing this, Fury's heart skipped a beat, and he subconsciously turned his head to look. When he saw the firearm on the table behind him, his expression changed instantly. "How's it going? It seems like the director has recognized what it is, right?" As he spoke, Tony waved his hand, and the design drawing of the energy weapon in front of him suddenly appeared on the screen in front of him. There is no doubt that this design drawing is what he got from the SHIELD system. "This is the design drawing I got after entering your system. I think you should be familiar with this, right?" Seeing Fury's increasingly ugly face, Tony showed no intention of stopping and pressed further. "Director, this should be the reason why you need the energy of the Rubik's Cube, right? So can you give us an explanation as to why you want to make these weapons?" Could it be that you want to start a war? Fury looked ugly and said solemnly, this is not something you should know. And I can assure you that even if these weapons are successfully manufactured, we will not use them casually, let alone start a war. After a pause, Fury continued, everything we do is for the peace of the earth. Peace. Tony smiled and was about to continue saying something. The next moment, the door opened again, and Natasha Romanoff walked in quickly. Dr. Banner, Loki's target is you. It's no longer safe for you here, and you need to evacuate immediately. As soon as these words came out, they instantly attracted everyone's attention. Chapter 414, Part 1. Loki's target is me? Banner frowned. His brain was thinking rapidly, and he had made a decision in the blink of an eye. With his wisdom, he naturally understands that in this situation, leaving here is the only option. After all, he also knows that apart from Hulk, there is nothing worthy of the other party's attention. So following this idea, Loki's purpose is also very clear. Once you appear here and launch an attack on the ship, it will inevitably cause great damage. Even for the safety of others, Banner has no reason to refuse. However, just when he was about to open his mouth and agree, what no one noticed was that on the workbench behind them, the mind scepter that was originally placed there quietly began to glow quietly. As the light emerged, the mind gem in it also quietly played a role. Under the influence of the mind gem, for some reason, Banner suddenly felt a surge of anger. Moreover, this anger was still expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye, occupying his mind. Even with the character he had trained for many years, he was completely unable to control it. Block. Immediately afterwards, Banner seemed to have forgotten his decision just now and looked in the direction of Natasha Romanoff. In the depths of his eyes, a touch of green quietly appeared. Didn't you ask me to come? Why do you want me to leave so soon? After saying this, Banner ignored Natasha Romanoff, turned to look in the direction of Fury, and said with a bad expression, so Director Nick Fury, can you first explain why SHIELD is using the Rubik's Cube to create some destructive weapons? Dr. Banner, you should be thinking of ways to find the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube now, instead of questioning me here. You don't have to worry about that. Upon hearing this, Banner narrowed his eyes slightly and said, the signal has been locked and we are searching for gamma ray markers. Once we find the target, we will lock it within half a mile. I guess there will be results in a while. So can you explain now the real purpose of what you did? Looking at the people gathered in the room at this moment, Chen Luo, Tony, Banner, Steve, Natasha Romanoff, and Thor, who finally came here. Facing the gazes of several people, Fury felt angry in his heart, as if he had lost all scruples, and turned around to look towards Thor. Because of him, Thor, who had been standing quietly watching the dispute, was suddenly stunned and asked in confusion, me? That's right. Fury nodded and explained, some time ago, the Earth welcomed a visitor from another planet. Because of some of his personal grudges, a small town was razed to the ground. We learned that not only are there other lives in this universe, but they are also much more powerful, advanced, and developed than us. Our people don't have any ill intentions towards your planet, but it can be expected that you are not the only ones in this universe. You're not the only threat either. And these are uncontrolled. Control? Just like you control the Rubik's Cube? Steve asked unceremoniously. At this time, Thor also reacted and glared at Fury. It is because of your development of the Rubik's Cube that you attracted Loki and his allies. For other planets, this is the high level for you Earthlings to do well. A sign of war preparations. High-level war? Fury sneered, you are the one who forced us to take action. We must have countermeasures. So we need a strong deterrent like nuclear weapons to calm everyone down. Tony answered. Then tell me how your company made a fortune. Stark? Fury sneered. If he is still making weapons, he must be buried in. Wait a minute. Seeing Steve also starting to help, Tony waved his hand quickly and looked at him with a puzzled expression. Captain, are you okay? Why are you targeting me again? I'm sorry, haven't I always treated you? Steve looked directly at Tony, and the fire in his eyes gradually began to burn. Ah. Thor sneered and looked at everyone. I thought people on Earth could be more civilized? I didn't expect they all looked the same. Wait a minute. Fury turned his head again. We Earthlings have not come to your territory to act recklessly. If we say uncivilized, you seem to be more suitable than us. If you have so little confidence in your teammates. Steve frowned and looked at Tony. When he was about to say something, he was interrupted by Chen Luo waving his hand. Sorry, we are not teammates yet. Regarding the dispute between the two, he would definitely choose to side with his friend. So Chen Luo also felt a hint of anger towards Steve, who was now targeting Tony. While several people were arguing, behind them, the light of Mind Gym became more and more dazzling. Please give me flowers. In the air of 10,000 meters high, not far from the space carrier, a jet black fighter jet quickly approached the front. Regarding the fighter jet's approach, The main control station quickly discovered the trace and quickly contacted it. Transport ship number 66B, please enter the confirmation password. There is your information in the computer, but there is no corresponding voyage record. What cargo are you transporting? Complete. In the fighter cabin, Barton sat in the co-pilot seat and answered calmly while entering the password, weapons and ammunition over. The password has been confirmed and the defense system has been lifted. Hearing this voice, Barton turned around and walked towards the cabin. While arranging his equipment, he looked at the other people in the cabin and said calmly, "Be prepared. Be ready to take action at any time." Yes. On the other side, inside the laboratory. Zero, you said you want order, but it's not a mess now? Looking at Fury, your voice sounded. Maybe this is his management style. Banner's eyes became even greener. What are we now? A team? No, we will only create chaos if we mix together. It's like a time bomb. Management? Fury was furious. When have I managed you? Besides, didn't you all decide to manage yourself before? If there is a problem with the management method, you should ask for their opinions. Speaking of this, Fury's eyes instantly looked at Chen Luo and Tony. What? It sounds like someone is dissatisfied with us? Tony said with a smile. Yeah, hiding in a battle suit and trying to be a hero. Steve looked directly at Tony and said rudely, without that battle suit, who are you? Let me think. Super genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. Are these enough? Facing the other person's gaze, Tony's eyes flashed with coldness. Who do you think I am? What about you? I'm just an experiment created by a tube of reagent. The abilities you have are just given to you by others, and my battle suit is made by me. Build it yourself. How do you have the right to judge me like this? While everyone was still arguing, on the outside of the mothership, the fighter plane controlled by Barton was gradually approaching the ship. The hatch was opened. Barton took out his weapon, bent his bow, and fired an arrow. A sharp arrow was shot out and landed somewhere on the ship's hull instantly. The arrow flashed red, as if it was about to explode at any moment. However, Tony and the others still knew nothing about the situation in the outside world. Chapter 415, Part 1. In the laboratory. Hearing Tony's words, Steve stared at him, silent for a while, and then said coldly, "Put on your battle suit, let's fight." Ah. Tony sneered and was about to speak. You Earthlings are so prone to internal strife. Thor on the side suddenly interrupted with a smile. Is this the team you're talking about? How ironic. Fury ignored the other party, turned to look at Natasha Romanoff and ordered, Natasha Romanoff, take Dr. Banner to his room. My room? Banner suddenly said, didn't you lend it to Loki? That's just in case. I actually don't want to. In case you need to kill me, right? What no one noticed was that the green in Banner's eyes began to become thicker at this moment. 890, but that's impossible. You'd better save it. It's not like I didn't try it before. I felt like I couldn't see the future, so I put the muzzle of the gun into my mouth and shot myself. What happened? The other one spit out the bullet. From that time on, I looked away and no longer tried to commit suicide. Instead, I tried to help others, go to other countries to live and work, and finally came back here. I thought my life was already on track, until you dragged me into this place. Chun is my friend, so I am willing to help him, but this does not mean you are always thinking about dealing with me. Don't you want to deal with me? Then come on. I've had enough of this damn place. By the end, Banner's voice gradually changed from calm to roaring. His eyes widened, and he stared at Fury, Natasha Romanoff, and the others in front of him. Anger rose in his heart, and a ferocious and violent aura emerged from his body, like a head. Beast was about to be released from the cage, making everyone present feel trembling. Seeing Banner's appearance at this moment, Natasha Romanoff's pupil shrank, almost subconsciously, reaching for her waist, holding the handle of the gun tightly, her body tense, ready to attack at any time. Banner. At this moment, Chen Luo finally said, calm down. Put down what you are holding. As soon as Chen Luo said his words, Banner perked up and subconsciously lowered his head to look at Shuangwei. At some point, in his hands, the spiritual scepter originally placed on the stage was already tightly held in his palm. Where the gem at the end of the scepter was placed, a bright light flickered in the room, attracting everyone's attention. Seeing this scene, Banner's heart trembled. The anger that was almost uncontrollable finally subsided a little. With the return of reason, Banner put the scepter in his hand back to its original position and was about to say something. At this time, bursts of rapid prompts suddenly sounded on the screen. There's a result. Tony's eyes lit up and he immediately reminded him. After hearing this, Banner had no intention of continuing and walked quickly towards the screen. After some operations on the screen, the analysis results finally appeared in front of him. Have you found the whereabouts of the Rubik's Cube? I can go there first? Tony said. Wait. Thor looked seriously and looked at everyone. The Rubik's Cube belongs to Asgard. Humans cannot control it. In addition, seeing Tony planning to leave, Steve stretched out his hand to stop him without thinking. You can't leave alone. You don't need to mind your own business. Tony pushed the other person away and said impatiently. Just as the two started arguing again, Banner looked at the analysis results on the screen, but couldn't help showing a hint of surprise on his face. This is... Boom. At this moment, outside the ship, the area originally shot by Barton. As the countdown came to an end, the next moment, a huge amount of fire appeared, and a violent explosion sounded loudly. As luck would have it, the explosion happened to occur near the laboratory. Before Banner could tell the results of the analysis, the floor beneath his and Thor's feet broke instantly. They were caught off guard. The person instantly fell towards the underground level. The glass surrounding the laboratory exploded with huge amounts of impact. Tony and Steve, who were still arguing on the side, flew out instantly and fell heavily to the ground. After struggling to get up, Steve and Tony finally found a trace of calmness after the explosion. They looked at each other and nodded in unison. Tony, you go put on the armor first and I'll cover you. Okay. Tony did not refuse. In this situation, with his ordinary physical fitness, he would be very likely to be in danger without the protection of a battlesuit. So it is best to have someone to protect him before putting on the battlesuit. Choose. As for why Chen Luo is not asked to help, the reason is very simple, because in Tony's judgment, the current situation here is much more troublesome than his. Recalling what had just happened, Tony knew that Banner was on the verge of breaking out at any time. Once the Hulk in his body completely went berserk, without Chen Luo here to help, not only them, but also the ship would be destroyed. Risk. Just as Tony and the two rushed towards the battlesuit storage area, Fury got up with difficulty in the laboratory, turned on the headset, and made contact with the control room. Hill, what happened? Sir, engine number 3 has stopped running. In the control room, Hill replied while asking the staff beside him, can it be repaired? The turbine is basically fine, but as long as we are still in flight, it is impossible to send people out to repair it. Looking at the display on the screen in front, the staff member replied solemnly. Looking at the screen in front of him, Hill looked extremely ugly. What will happen to us if we lose another engine? It will crash, sir, the other party said without hesitation. Someone has to go out and repair the engine. On the other side, Fury also heard the detailed situation. His face was anxious. He stood up, looked around, and said loudly, Chun, did you hear that? Please help me. Boom. The next moment, a short hammer surrounded by thunder and lightning rushed out from under the floor. 2.8 had a close contact with Chen Luo. Under the huge amounts of impact, Chen Luo instantly hit the ceiling, knocking a big hole out of the deck above and disappearing into the sky. *T. Seeing this scene, Fury's pupil shrank, and without thinking, he immediately started contacting Tony. Tony, I'll leave the engine to you. Chun is being held back by Thor. I understand. On the other side, Tony also understood the seriousness of the matter and nodded immediately, then quickened his pace and walked towards the battlesuit storage area. Phil Coulson. Open the defensive blockade in the closed area and go to the armory. Receive. Romanoff. I'm fine. Natasha Romanoff shook her head, and as her consciousness returned, she slowly stood up and looked around. However, as soon as she saw the scene behind her, Natasha Romanoff's expression changed drastically. Chapter 416, Part 1. On the deck of the ship, as the fighter plane landed, Barton led a group of soldiers down from the cabin, walked to a certain place on the deck with familiarity, opened the cover above, and formally led the people into the interior of the ship. Can't let them fix the engine. Barton began to issue instructions in an orderly manner. In addition, take a team of people to the closed area to turn off the cameras. Yes. Then, under Barton's order, the soldiers behind him instantly divided into 2 teams and rushed towards their respective destinations. After arranging the others, Barton did not stop here. He turned around and looked around, identified the direction, and then silently started his actions. While Barton was leading people into the ship, on the other side, Natasha Romanoff's situation was undoubtedly more dangerous. Because behind him at this moment, Banner was lying on the ground with a ferocious look on his face. His arm muscles tensed, his body arched upward, and his mouth kept roaring like a beast. Romanoff, what's that sound over there? Looking at the Banner in front of her, Natasha Romanoff swallowed subconsciously and whispered, It's Banner. There seems to be something wrong with Banner. What? Fury's expression changed, and he immediately warned without thinking. Run. Roar. However, his reminder came a little late. Along with a roar of huge amounts, the green in Banner's eyes could no longer be suppressed and quickly began to spread to all parts of his body. At the same time, Banner's body also began to expand rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. His top was stretched open and gradually torn, turning into countless strips of cloth hanging on his body. His lower body trousers were also bursting in an instant, leaving only the permanent pair. The undamaged shorts still stubbornly guarded his last bit of dignity. Finally, when all the changes were over, what appeared in front of Natasha Romanoff at this moment was a terrifying monster about 2.5 meters tall, covered in green skin, with gnarled muscles, and a face full of violence. Under the influence of Loki's provocation, the influence of Mind Gym, the argument just now, and the attack just now, Banner, who had been struggling to suppress his anger, finally couldn't control it. As the anger emerged from the bottom of his heart, Hulk, who was sleeping in his body, also woke up. Feeling the beast-like aura exuding from the Hulk in front of her, Natasha Romanoff, who knew the strength of the opponent, her face was visibly tense, her body muscles were tense, motionless, and her mind was blank. Slowly turning her head, when Natasha Romanoff and Hulk looked at each other, her heart suddenly shook. Without thinking, she turned and ran towards the rear passage. Roar! Seeing this scene, his brain was already occupied by anger. Hulk, who had lost his mind, was like a beast that had discovered its prey. With huge amounts of roaring, he quickly turned around and chased after the opponent. Bang bang bang. Wherever Hulk passed, deep footprints were instantly made on the steel floor. He casually pushed aside the obstacles in front of him. The surrounding passages were instantly destroyed, and huge and dull sounds spread in all directions. Loki was in a closed room, listening to the terrifying roars coming from above his head. As if he thought of something, a smile appeared on Loki's face, and he murmured in a low voice, "It's begun. So, how should you respond next?" Chen Luo. Natasha Romanoff. Natasha Romanoff. T. Hearing the loud noise coming from under his feet, Fury cursed secretly and immediately stopped staying here and walked towards the control room. Drive the aircraft carrier back to coordinates 180, head south, and return to the water. Fury came to the control room as quickly as possible and gave the order loudly. Although he is worried about Natasha Romanoff's safety, he understands that the most important thing now is the failure of the engine. Once Tony is unable to complete the task and repair the engine, the spacecraft will fall from an altitude of tens of thousands of meters. If that happens, not only Natasha Romanoff, but everyone on the spaceship may not survive. Therefore, for the sake of everyone's life safety, Fury must leave an escape route for everyone as soon as possible. As long as the spacecraft is driven back to the water, their lives will not be in danger even if the engine is damaged. We are flying blindly. The staff member responsible for driving the spacecraft stood up and looked at Fury nervously. "Sir, the navigation system is being recalibrated. Did you see the sun rising?" Fury shouted. "Then fly in the direction of the sun. Make sure to bring us back to the sea." "Yes, sir." Just as Fury was nervously directing everyone to drive the mothership to the sea, inside the ship, Natasha Romanoff was still running forward in a panic. Taking advantage of her body shape, Natasha Romanoff swam flexibly in the slightly narrow passages around her, dodging and moving to avoid threats coming from behind. But even so, facing Hulk, who possesses overwhelming power, he is still getting closer step by step. In the face of Hulk's powerful power, the obstacles around him could only block him for a moment, and then he was blasted into countless pieces by a punch, or was knocked directly forward to make a big hole. The huge amounts of size do not affect its speed at all. Even in such a narrow space, Hulk is like a predator at the top of nature, chasing his prey with no intention of giving up. Looking at the figure getting closer and closer, the look on Hulk's face became even more violent. The corners of his mouth grinned in a cruel arc, and his hands quickly reached forward to grab the prey in front of him. Facing the movement coming from behind, as if she felt danger, just when Hulk was about to succeed, Natasha Romanoff was like a prophet. Her body was short, and she barely escaped Hulk's inevitable blow. Immediately afterwards, Natasha Romanoff kept moving. In such a life-and-death crisis, 210 her body exploded with unprecedented potential, and her speed increased dramatically. In less than a second, she turned around and ran to the stairs behind Hulk. At the end, open the door above and disappear from Hulk's sight in an instant. Roar! Seeing the prey disappearing, Hulk's eyes became even more fierce. He jumped up without any hesitation, came to the door, and thrust forward with his hands. The steel door did not block it at all, and he was instantly blocked by the pair of doors. Huge amounts of hands penetrate. Turn your hands around, hold the steel on both sides, and then tear it apart with force. There was a harsh and sharp sound of metal friction. Inside the door, Natasha Romanoff, who had no way to escape, watched helplessly as the steel door in front of her was torn in half by the big green hands. Then, when that familiar figure appeared in front of her again, at this moment her heart was suddenly covered with deep despair. With her body pressed against the wall behind her, Natasha Romanoff looked around anxiously. However, no matter how she looked, there was no other exit to this room except the door just now. Seeing Hulk approaching step by step, the color on Natasha Romanoff's face faded. Her body seemed to have completely lost the strength to resist, and she collapsed on the ground helplessly. Looking at the prey so close, Hulk showed a cruel smile, and slowly stretched his hands forward to grab Natasha Romanoff. However, just when he was about to succeed, something changed suddenly. Chapter 417, Part 1. Boom. A roar of huge amounts sounded above the heads of the room where Hulk and Natasha Romanoff were sitting. Then, before the two of them could react, a figure wearing a red cloak instantly crashed through the ceiling, and then hit Hulk with unabated force. Under the impact of huge amounts of impact, Thor and Hulk knocked out a big hole in the floor under their feet again, and disappeared from Natasha Romanoff's eyes in the blink of an eye. Seeing this scene, Natasha Romanoff, who had just escaped from death, felt her body go limp and collapsed on the ground, unable to move anymore. Breathing heavily and looking at the big hole not far from her feet, Natasha Romanoff finally regained some sense after regaining some strength. Just when she felt a little confused, suddenly, there was a shaking in the air, and Chen Luo's figure appeared in front of her eyes. Looking at the deep pit at his feet, Chen Luo said without looking back, "Let's go, before they catch up." Hearing this, Natasha Romanoff felt a chill in her heart and reacted instantly. Although I don't know what happened that caused Chen Luo to fight Thor, it seems that Chen Luo did not lose his mind like Hulk. In addition, the other party just saved him from Hulk, so it was almost subconscious. She had a little more trust in Chen Luo's words. Nodding vigorously, and after regaining some strength, she stood up with difficulty. Natasha Romanoff was about to leave, but at this moment, she seemed to suddenly think of something, turned her head, and looked at Chen Luo worriedly. "Chun, is there any problem with you?" Chen Luo waved his hand with a calm expression. "Leave this place to me. You'd better stay away. Otherwise, the next battle is likely to affect you." I don't know what happened to Thor, but he was also silently affected by the power of Mind Gem. This was somewhat beyond Chen Luo's expectation, so when Thor suddenly attacked him, Chen Luo didn't only when you are on guard will you be attacked by him. If it weren't for Chen Luo's super speed regeneration ability, he would have been seriously injured on the spot with just that blow. After all, Thor didn't have any impact on the blow just now. Mjolnir was shrouded in dazzling divine power. It was precisely because of the blessing of divine power that Chen Luo's energy conversion ability had no effect, and he was knocked off the deck in an instant. It was also the scene Fury saw before. After a successful blow, Thor kept moving and flew into the sky to start a fierce battle with Chen Luo. While fighting, Chen Luo has also been paying attention to the situation inside the aircraft carrier. So when Natasha Romanoff is in danger, he will rescue her immediately. Looking at the terrifying aura gradually rising in the big pit below, Chen Luo's brows wrinkled slightly, and he couldn't help but feel a little troubled. The situation is now very clear. With Thor, Hulk, and two people being affected one after another, they are now in a hostile state. This is not a good thing for Chen Luo's side, especially for the aircraft carrier where everyone is now. If there is only Hulk alone, Chen Luo is confident that he can quickly suppress him, but if Thor, a demigod, is added, things will instantly become much more difficult. It is worth mentioning that although Chen Luo's teleportation ability can take people away together, it is only for people below demigods. If the other person is at the demigod level like him, he actively uses divine power during the teleportation process. If he resists, then even he can't take him away. Therefore, it is now impossible to transfer the two people from here to other places through teleportation. Now, if he wants to prevent the two people from continuing to cause damage to the aircraft carrier, he has only one choice. Only by defeating the two of them head-on, and after they calm down, can the people here truly be safe. Roar! Just as Chen Luo was thinking, the next moment, a thunderous roar sounded from below, and then Hulk jumped up and appeared in front of Chen Luo in an instant, with a ferocious face full of violent killing intent, and all his muscles the bulge. Huge amounts of fists were instantly swung out, and they were blasted towards Chen Luo. Hulk, calm down. Seeing this, Chen Luo's expression remained unchanged. He stretched out one hand, and lightly received the opponent's punch that weighed 1,000 tons. Then the energy of the punch quickly gathered and transformed in his body, and finally gathered in the other hand. The other hand made a fist mark, and in less than a blink of an eye, it was quickly stamped on Hulk's chest. Hulk's body was instantly bent and arched under the unprecedented impact. His whole body seemed to turn into a human-shaped cannonball, which instantly crashed through the deck above and flew towards the sky. Zitzi. However, at this moment, a dazzling electric light exploded under Chen Luo's feet, covering Chen Luo's entire body. Under this blow containing divine power, Chen Luo's energy transformation seemed to have lost its effect. His body was twitching rapidly, and countless blood marks appeared on the surface of his body. When the thunder and lightning disappeared, Chen Luo had turned into a body covered in blood. The bloody man looks ferocious and terrifying. Chen Luo. Seeing this scene, Natasha Romanoff's eyes shrank before she could leave, and she subconsciously exclaimed, "Boom." But at this time, Thor was not in the mood to pay attention to the opponent. After succeeding in the attack, Thor kept moving and quickly jumped up from the hole below. Mjolnir danced in his hand and hit Chen Luo hard, sending him flying into the sky again. Roar. At the same time, above the sky, Hulk reappeared at some unknown time. After receiving a blow from Chen Luo, Hulk's eyes were filled with anger at this moment, and his body expanded rapidly in the endless anger. It even broke through the 3-meter mark, and various physical skills, nojis, were greatly enhanced. At this moment, Hulk seemed to have turned into a green meteor, hitting Chen Luo straight in the direction. Hulk's fist carried huge amounts of force that was enough to shatter the hill. Coupled with the kinetic energy blessing falling from the sky, this punch was even more powerful. Unprecedented destructive power. Even before he was physically present, on the surface of Hulk's fist, circles of white air waves spread wildly outward at a speed visible to the naked eye. The air in front of him seemed to be exploded, making terrifying sonic boom sounds. The momentum is amazing, instantly attracting the attention of everyone below. What is that? In the control room, a person suddenly let out an exclamation, stood up quickly, and looked toward the sky outside the window in front, his face full of horror. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads to look. When they saw the scene in front of them, everyone's expressions changed, including Fury, who was still directing. Chapter 418, Part 1. That's Hulk. Fury's pupils shrank, and he finally recognized the identity of one of them through the highly recognizable skin. Seeing the green meteor that Hulk had transformed into move forward rapidly and hit the figure covered in blood in front of him, almost subconsciously, Fury's heart suddenly tightened. Through the conversation with Natasha Romanoff just now, Fury now knows very well that Hulk has fallen into a state of madness. Coupled with the previous scene where Chen Luo was knocked away, it is obvious that there is something wrong with Thor. These two major powers stand on opposite sides one after another. Now, the only person left on this mothership who can fight against them is Chen Luo. Thinking about it this way, the identity of the figure outside is self-evident. Seeing Chen Luo's miserable appearance at this moment, Fury couldn't help but feel worried. But this was just the beginning. At the same time that Hulk was attacking Chen Luo, a dazzling thunder column erupted from the deck under Chen Luo's feet, shooting straight into the sky and instantly covering Chen Luo's entire body. As before, Chen Luo's energy conversion ability was also interfered with by the power of thunder and lightning, making him unable to defend against Hulk's next attack. Boom 453. The next moment, a green giant fist crashed through the thunder and lightning in front of him. Even though these thunder and lightning containing divine power blasted his arms with scorch marks, they showed no sign of stopping him. On the contrary, they only added to his strength. With a bit of ferocity, he roared angrily. His arm expanded a few times again, and his fist as heavy as a ton fell suddenly. With a terrifying and clear loud noise, under the gaze of everyone in the cabin, Chen Luo's chest was instantly blasted into countless pieces. Even though Chen Luo's body strength had already surpassed steel, under the bombardment of this terrifying force, he was still without any possibility of resistance. It turned into a rain of blood and scattered in the sky. Boom. Hulk's body hit the deck heavily, causing the deck under his feet to collapse nearly half a meter deep. Countless cracks spread around it, making bursts of heart-wrenching sounds. At the same time, at the epicenter of the violent earthquake caused by Hulk's fall, below the ceiling in the passage began to shake violently, and from time to time, heavy steel plates fell from above, completely burying the pedestrians below. Looking up at the rain of blood floating in the sky, Hulk let out a roar of huge amounts, his face ferocious and violent, and his whole body exuded an extremely heavy power that made people dare not approach him at all. After successfully dealing with Chen Luo, Hulk, who had lost his goal, turned around and looked around, looking at the huge amount of deck in front of him, his eyes flashing with anger, and he walked with heavy steps towards the largest building in front of him. Go. And that place is in the direction of the control room where Fury and others are at this moment. Boom. However, before he could take a few steps, another huge amount of lightning emerged from under his feet, instantly enveloping Hulk. In the large hole that suddenly appeared below, Thor jumped to the top of the deck, without even looking at Hulk's miserable state at the moment. His eyes moved to the direction where Chen Luo was hit just now, his body tensed and his face solemn. Although Chen Luo has turned into countless blood rains and sprinkled the sky at this moment, but somehow, as a strong man at the demigod level, Thor can still feel a heavy sense of crisis from it. With a thought in his mind, Mjolnir was surrounded by thunder and lightning in his hand. Thor threw it forward and swung the thunder hammer in the direction of Chen Luo. Roar. However, just as Mjolnir was released from Thor's hand, behind him, Hulk finally got rid of the shackles of thunder and lightning. He rushed out of the thunder and lightning with difficulty. Even though his body was covered with black marks, he still could not hide his ferocity. He stared straight at Thor in front of him with a pair of green pupils, roared wildly, and rushed forward. Go down. A strong wind blew against his face, and before Hulk could reach him, Thor's heart suddenly froze, and his warrior instinct made him react subconsciously. Even though his back was turned to the opponent, it was as if there were eyes on the back of his head at this moment. He raised his hands, and on one side of his body, he grasped Hulk's arm just right in his hand, and then swung it forward fiercely. Unprepared, Hulk's huge body was instantly thrown towards a fighter plane hundreds of meters ahead, kebab, directly smashing the fighter plane into two pieces and plowing a deep ravine on the steel deck. Then finally stopped. But such an attack had no impact on Hulk. He slowly got up from the ground. At the same time, the scorch marks all over his body began to recover quickly due to Hulk's inhuman resilience. After a few seconds, it returned to its original state again. Looking at Thor in front of him, the fierce look in Hulk's eyes became even more fierce. He roared, jumped in front of the broken fighter plane, stretched out his hand to lift one of the fighter planes above his head, and then threw it violently in the direction of Thor. Seeing this, Thor jumped back without hesitation and dodged Hulk's attack. Boom! Huge amounts of explosions sounded at the location where Thor was just now, and a huge amount of fireball rose. The temperature of the surrounding air began to rise sharply, and thick smoke billowed with alarming momentum. Through the flames in front, Thor's eyes flashed with electricity, and he moved his feet, about to continue the attack. However, before he could make any move, he seemed to feel something and suddenly raised his head and looked towards the sky. At the same time, Hulk felt a warning sign in his heart and looked towards the sky almost simultaneously with Thor. Following the gazes of the two people, they saw that where Chen Luo was originally, the rain of blood that should have dissipated long ago was still floating in the sky, moving towards the surroundings at a speed visible to the naked eye. Unknowingly, while the two were fighting, the sky above their heads was already covered by a thick cloud of blood. The blood cloud covered thousands of miles in radius, completely enveloping the mothership below, and at the same time blocking the sunlight above. The entire aircraft carrier was shrouded in a huge amount of shadow. Even though the blood cloud is still thousands of meters away from the deck, and there is a baffle blocking the front, everyone inside the ship can still faintly feel the rich blood. What happened? What is that in the sky? In the control room, everyone looked at the sky in horror, their faces full of confusion and fear. Don't panic, everyone. At this time, Fury's voice suddenly sounded. Looking at the blood cloud in the sky, he seemed to have thought of something, his face relaxed, and he explained to everyone, "That is one of our Avengers. He is on our side. He will not hurt us. Look, Hulk and the others have been restrained now. Everyone, calm down. Go to the number 3 engine to help, and repair the engine completely as soon as possible." "Sir." At this time, Hill seemed to have received some news. His face changed slightly, and he said, "The intruder has been found. It's Agent Barton." Hearing this, Fury frowned and quickly changed his words. "Change the target temporarily. Send someone to deal with Barton and the others first. Natasha Romanoff should be fine now. Let her lead the team to deal with it. By the way, send another team to Loki's side and be sure not to let him leave the cage."
Yes.
After arranging all this, Fury raised his head and looked at the sky again, with a trace of worry in his eyes. "Chen Luo, it's up to you." Chapter 419, Part 1. Although the interior of the ship is now in chaos, Fury knows that with the headquarters' current strength, it can still be solved. But unlike the destruction of the internal engine and Barton's sudden attack, the two Thor Hulks on the deck at the moment are the top priority of this crisis. If Chen Luo couldn't suppress these two people, with their strength, absolutely no one in this ship could stop him. Needless to say, Hulk, as for Thor, he is a strong man at the demigod level. It would be okay if he didn't know before, but since the comparison with Apocalypse, how much destructive power a strong man at this level can cause, he knew it all too well. Once the opponent is allowed to use all their strength, not to mention the space carrier they are currently on, even a city like New York can be destroyed in an instant. So if Chen Luo can't defeat these two people, then they will be really in danger when facing these two people who are in abnormal condition at this moment. While Fury was worried about Chen Luo, on the other side, in the secret room where the roadbed was, boom, there was a huge amount of explosion. The door opened instantly, and then Barton walked in quickly. "You came." Seeing this, Loki was not surprised at all and said calmly, "Open this cage. Next, it is time for us to start the next plan."
Yes.
Barton nodded, and after some operations on the front console, the cage slowly began to rise, truly releasing Loki. Slowly stepped out of the cage and came to Barton. Loki looked upward in a certain direction, felt carefully for a moment, and then said, "Let's go. Get my scepter back, and then it's time for us."
Yes.
Then, Barton followed Loki's footsteps and walked towards the destination. However, not long after the two of them moved forward, there was a rush of footsteps, and around a corner, Natasha Romanoff came over with a small team. When she saw Loki and the two in front of her, her expression changed instantly and she immediately attacked. "Attitude. Barton, agent." Natasha Romanoff shouted, "Wake up. Loki, he is just using you." Looking at the people in front of him, Loki twitched the corner of his mouth slightly, without any intention of taking action, and said without looking back, "Barton, I'll leave this to you."
Yes.
Without saying a word, Barton took out the long arrow from his back, bent the bow and shot it forward without any hesitation. "Hide quickly." Seeing this scene, Natasha Romanoff's pupil shrank, and without thinking, she subconsciously reminded her. Boom. Huge amounts of fire suddenly emerged from behind several people, and thick smoke billowed, firmly blocking the sight of both parties. Seeing this, Loki chuckled, and his body instantly turned into a light green phantom, gradually disappearing in place. Loki! Natasha Romanoff, who had barely escaped the attack just now, saw this scene, and her eyes instantly became extremely sharp. Without thinking, she subconsciously pulled out the pistol in her waist and shot immediately. Several flashes of fire flashed from the muzzle of the gun, passing through the air in front of him without any hindrance, sparking sparks on the wall behind. Taking a closer look, Loki was nowhere to be seen. However, she didn't have time to worry about where Loki was going next, because the next moment she fired, 2 sharp arrows instantly broke through the air in front of her and shot in her direction again. Natasha Romanoff's pupil shrank, and without thinking, she turned over and rolled to her side, narrowly avoiding Barton's attack. After avoiding the attack, Natasha Romanoff kept moving, her body like a vigorous cheetah, rushing towards Barton's direction. While moving forward, Natasha Romanoff shook her hands, and electromagnetic restraint devices were thrown out from her waist and spread all around Barton. Looking at the electromagnetic devices flashing blue light at his feet, Barton's expression changed, and he immediately dodged aside without thinking. Once these devices are activated, although they will not cause fatal harm to him, they will be enough to constrain his actions, leaving him no longer able to resist. Barton's reaction was all within Natasha Romanoff's expectations. Taking advantage of the opponent's lack of time to attack, he quickly approached the opponent and then launched a close combat without any hesitation. Although the two are now in a hostile state, Natasha Romanoff does not want to take away the other's life. As long as there is a slight possibility, she still wants to capture the other and then find a way to awaken the other's reason. Based on this consideration, close combat is undoubtedly the safest method. Barton also saw Natasha Romanoff's plan at a glance, but he was not afraid at all. He held a bow in one hand and immediately faced her. "Please give me flowers." Although he has always used bows and arrows to fight, he is also at the top level when it comes to fighting. Even compared to Natasha Romanoff, he is not inferior. Therefore, as soon as the two of them fought, they were immediately in a stalemate, and neither one could do anything to the other. Originally, in this situation, Natasha Romanoff had backup behind her, but unfortunately, the next moment, the agent team brought by Barton finally arrived. The two teams immediately started fighting, and there was no time to take care of Natasha Romanoff. Side. While the two were fighting, on the other side was the laboratory where Banner and others were originally. Loki's figure quietly appeared, turned his head, looked at the ruins aside, his eyes flashed. He strode forward, lifted up the heavy piece of steel under his feet with one hand, and threw it aside. When he completely cleared the ruins, finally, 10 glowing scepters were quietly at this moment lying on the ground. He leaned down and held the scepter in his hand. With the scepter in hand, at this moment, he had no reason to stay here anymore. After all, the reason why he chose to be arrested in the first place was to provoke internal conflicts among Chen Luo and others. If he could find a way to anger Banner and make him go berserk, it would inevitably greatly delay Chen Luo and others. And this was also the plan he decided upon when he first came to Earth. But with Thor's arrival, Loki suddenly had a new idea in his mind. That is to find a way to influence Thor through the power of the mind gem. Once successful, then let Chen Luo and Hulk Thor fight against each other at the same time, so that they can kill each other. Perhaps he can succeed in revenge without resorting to Chitauri's power. But because Thor is a demigod, he needs to be particularly careful if he wants to realize his plan. Once he is discovered, all his efforts will be wasted. Therefore, as early as Thor had just arrived and came to the cabin to look for him, he quietly began to guide him. After returning to the headquarters, he started to provoke conflicts among everyone. In addition, coupled with the influence of Mind Gem, he finally made it possible. Thor also fell into his trap and was used by him just like Hulk. He raised his head and looked at the sky that had turned blood red through the big hole above. The corner of Loki's mouth quietly raised a slight arc. "Chen Luo, I don't know if you are satisfied with this great gift I have prepared for you." Boo. Chapter 420, Part 1. Above the aircraft carrier's head, the blood cloud stretching for thousands of miles suddenly changed at this moment. In the center of the blood cloud, I saw the figure who had been punched through the chest by Hulk, and the upper body exploded into countless blood rain, leaving only the half of the body still there, slowly floating towards the sky at this moment. The blood cloud slowly began to rotate, like a funnel of huge amounts, and a giant tornado made of blood cloud descended from the sky and connected with Chen Luo. The moment the two came into contact, the blood cloud quickly began to transform, transforming into a body of flesh and blood. Under the gaze of everyone below, Chen Luo's upper body began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, it only took less than a few seconds. When the blood cloud tornado slowly dispersed, Chen Luo's body also returned to its original shape. And what's different from before is that Chen Luo at this moment has also undergone huge amounts of changes compared to the normal state. A pair of huge bat wings with a width of 280 and about 15 meters stretched out from behind. The bat wings were blood red, as if they were made of blood. Countless blood flows on the bat wing, and a thin layer of red halo blooms in it. Combined with the blood cloud above the head, it looks like a 1,000-year-old demon that has just been released from the seal. The terrifying momentum is overwhelming and heading towards people are surging around him, and even just looking at his figure can give people an extremely heavy sense of oppression. Lowering his head and looking at the two Hulk Thors standing on the deck below, Chen Luo's eyes flashed with coldness. In the palm of his hand, a spear covered in blood gradually condensed and took shape. Hulk, Thor, it's time for you to calm down. As soon as he finished speaking, Chen Luo threw it casually, and the spear disappeared from his hand in an instant, piercing the air in front of him and shooting downwards. Due to the obstruction of the blood clouds above, Chen Luo, who is in the shadow, now has the blessing of the ability of dark favor, and his physical fitness has improved again. Even if it is just a casual throw, his strength is already comparable to that of the rage state at this moment. The Hulk is on par. The blood-colored spear blasted the air in front of him, and circles of white air waves visible to the naked eye continued to spread outward, accompanied by a terrifying sonic boom. Before Thor could react, the next moment, Hulk's roar sounded. Turning his head subconsciously, Thor suddenly felt alarm bells ringing in his heart. Hulk, who had already recovered from Thor's lightning strike, was suddenly pierced by a blood-colored spear through his chest. Then, with unabated force, he was nailed to the deck below, unable to move at all. Roar! Hulk let out a painful roar, a pair of green eyes fixed on his chest. His face was ferocious. He held the spear on his chest tightly with both hands, his arm muscles tightened, and he wanted to break it. But no matter how strong he was, how powerful, in this spear that contains all the divine power of Chen Luo's ability, all his power has been absorbed, unable to shake it. Seeing this scene, although Thor's heart was filled with anger, he still made the most effective response due to his strong fighting instinct. Mjolnir flew back from the sky to his hand, with thunder and lightning all over his body, and he raised his hammer to the sky. Then, the October Wu Wei, which contained countless thunder and lightning, slowly began to condense. Although due to the gap in divine power, the dark cloud he condensed was not as exaggerated as the blood cloud above Chen Luo's head, it still played the role Thor wanted. Boom! Above Chen Luo's head, the original blood-red clouds were gradually mixed with strands of ink. The blood clouds and dark clouds merged with each other, which seemed to add a bit of heavy pressure. In addition, in this new cloud layer, the original blue thunder and lightning seemed to be soaked in blood, and all turned into blood-colored thunder and lightning that shuttled through the cloud layer, like long bloody dragons, exuding extremely terrifying power. The next moment, countless bloody thunder and lightning fell one after another, rushing straight towards Chen Luo. Chen Luo had been prepared for this for a long time. Before the thunder and lightning fell, Chen Luo thought and disappeared in an instant. As Chen Luo teleported and disappeared, the countless bloody thunder and lightning in the sky, under the control of Thor, continued to surge toward the deck below, in the direction of Hulk. Hulk's indestructible body was instantly torn apart by the thunder and lightning, and countless wounds appeared on his body. The green blood in his body was evaporated by the high temperature of the thunder and lightning as soon as it flowed out of the body. Although the lethality of these thunder and lightning is very shocking, correspondingly, the bloody spear on Hulk's chest at this moment was also bombarded by thunder and lightning, and was gradually blasted into countless fragments and dissipated in the air pressure. As the bloody spear disappeared, Hulk seemed to have been released from the seal. He endured the pain, struggled to get up, and step by step left the range of lightning. But when he finally escaped from the thunder and lightning, he was in extremely miserable condition. There were countless bone-deep wounds all over his body, and all the blood in the wounds had turned into charcoal. He was stumbling, and even standing seemed extremely difficult. Although there were countless wounds on his body, this happened to completely anger Hulk. The green eyes became deeper and his face became more ferocious. He raised his head to the sky and let out a roar. The raging anger seemed to turn into real flames and rushed towards Hulk's body. Pour it in. Driven by this outpouring of anger, Hulk suddenly underwent a new round of changes. The blood gradually regenerates in the body, and as the blood flows, it makes a rumbling sound like the Yangtze River, which is astonishing. The heart began to beat violently, like a powerful engine, pouring infinite power into it. The scorch marks on the surface of the body began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the body began to expand again. Finally, when the change ended, What appeared in front of everyone at this moment was a terrifying monster that was 5 meters in size and covered in green. The shorts were still worn stubbornly on the body, but because Hulk's body size had expanded too much at this moment, the shorts had become a bit more tattered. The muscles all over his body are knotted, like the roots of an old tree. Even if he is just standing quietly at the same place at this moment, he can still feel a sense of strength as heavy as a mountain. 2.7 just let out a gentle breath, and the next moment, a strong wind hit. Even if the two were dozens of meters apart, Thor could feel a faint pain in his cheek. Stepping forward gently, the deck suddenly made a harsh metallic sound and sank instantly. When the steps left the back passage, footprints about 10 centimeters deep remained in place. The next moment, Hulk seemed to notice something. He exerted force under his feet, and a large area of the deck below instantly cracked. With the force of the shock, he instantly rose into the sky and headed somewhere in the sky. Roar! Huge amounts of roars sounded, and the sound waves spread in all directions. He punched out violently, causing a terrifying sonic boom. As huge amounts of fists fell, Chen Luo's figure appeared in front of him at the right moment. Before he could react, the punch hit his body. Chapter 421, Part 1. With the support of constant anger, at this moment, Hulk's size has skyrocketed, and his strength has also undergone an earth-shaking change. At this moment, his power has far exceeded the realm of ordinary people, and has even reached the realm of gods. The moment the punch landed, the energy carried in the fist reached the level of a nuclear bomb. Such punch power, even without divine power, could forcefully break through the upper limit of energy conversion ability and truly touch Chen Luo's body. In addition, Hulk's intuition at this moment has reached the level of Logan. So before Chen Luo appeared, he jumped up like a prophet and punched out with a punch. Chen Luo was hit by this punch instantly as if he was delivered to his door. The energy conversion ability started to operate at the same time. However, what surprised Chen Luo was that the energy contained in this punch was far beyond his imagination. Even if most of the energy absorption contained in this punch was used, the remaining power was still causing him huge amounts of damage. His chest once again turned into a rain of blood. At the same time, under the terrifying power of 21's fist, Chen Luo was like a human-shaped cannonball. Along with the white air waves visible to the naked eye, he drew a long vacuum channel in the air. In an instant, the blood cloud that sank into the sky broke through the atmosphere and flew towards space. After flying several thousand meters beyond the earth, Chen Luo stopped awkwardly. Bloody divine power surged through his body, and his body began to repair at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, in just a few seconds, Chen Luo recovered completely. Turning around and looking around, the endless vacuum environment was filled with endless loneliness and coldness. If ordinary people were in such an environment, they would be frozen in an instant. However, for Chen Luo, who has divine power, such an environment but it had no impact at all. Before the divine power is exhausted, a demigod-level expert will always have the ability to survive in a vacuum environment. However, if the distance to the planet is too far, once the divine power is exhausted, even a demigod-level expert will eventually be unable to survive in a vacuum environment. Will perish in this environment. But fortunately, Chen Luo was only a few kilometers away from the Earth at the moment, so he was still helpless at this level. With a thought in his mind, the batwing behind him dissipated, and then his body was wrapped in a thin layer of blood-colored light balls. Under the control of Chen Luo, he flew towards the Earth. On the aircraft carrier where SHIELD headquarters is located, Hulk fell back onto the deck again with a heavy sound. Boom! Under his feet, the deck cracked in large areas and collapsed one after another. Even the entire ship sank and began to shake slightly. What happened? Feeling the shaking of the ship, Tony, who was busy repairing the engine and didn't realize what was happening outside, was suddenly stunned and couldn't help but ask. But there was no need to wait for others to answer. When he inadvertently raised his head and looked at the sky, the blood immediately came into view. That is, Tony, focus on what's in front of you. Not far away from him, Steve's roar sounded, and he was seen trying his best to drag a steel door beside him. In the shock just now, the door behind him happened to be damaged. The earthquake broke apart, and several people outside the door were unable to dodge, and were instantly taken out of the cabin by this door. If a few people hadn't been well trained and subconsciously grasped the door in panic, they would have fallen from an altitude of tens of thousands of meters. On the other side, Steve also had quick eyesight and quick hands. Just when the door was about to fall away, he immediately reached out and grabbed the handle on the door, and relied on his own strength to tightly restrain it. Do not let it escape from your hands. His face was ferocious, his arm muscles were tense, and he was dragging it slowly towards the cabin bit by bit. Seeing the situation on Steve's side, Tony raised his eyebrows, and without caring about the situation above, he said, "Captain, do you need help?" "No." Steve gritted his teeth and replied, "Your mission over there is the most important. Just leave it to me here." "Listen, Tony, the engine has to be fixed, or we're all screwed. Hearing this, Tony's eyes flashed. Without saying anything, he turned to look at the engine in front of him and started to get busy again. On the deck of the ship, Hulk had just landed, but the next moment, his beast-like intuition seemed to sense something, and he suddenly looked up at the sky. Thor slowed down a moment, but then his expression changed and he turned to look at the blood cloud in the sky. In his perception, an extremely powerful wave of divine power was spreading unbridled around, approaching them rapidly. Feeling this powerful power, Thor held Mjolnir tightly in his hand. His whole body was shining with thunder and lightning, his muscles were tense, and he was ready to attack at any time. Under the gaze of the two people, soon, the blood clouds in the sky gradually changed. In the center, the clouds intertwined with Thor's divine power melted like snow, and then, a bloody sun slowly fell from the sky. The big sun is made up of endless blood flames. It is hundreds of meters in size. The blood flames outline textures and seem to occupy the entire sky, filling everyone's field of vision. This great sun is entirely composed of highly condensed divine power. The total amount of divine power required to form this great sun makes Thor feel shocked and the hairs all over his body stand on end. The bloody sun rushed toward the deck at an extremely fast speed, dragging a 163-long tail flame in the sky, like a real sun falling, destroying everything. Looking at the bloody sun above his head, Thor did not dare to let it get close. He immediately roared, and the dazzling thunder and lightning flashed, and then turned into a huge thunder and lightning beam surrounded by several people and shot straight into the sky. At the same time, Hulk also made moves. Roaring towards the sky, Hulk moved his feet, and the ship's hull shook violently. He rose into the sky, his arm muscles tensed, and he blasted towards the bloody sun in the sky. Thunder and lightning instantly enveloped this bloody sun, and the two divine powers began to consume each other. However, because there is a big gap in the total amount of divine power between Thor and Chen Luo, if it is a war of attrition, Thor will never be Chen Luo's opponent. But fortunately, Thor was not the only one fighting Chen Luo. Following him, Hulk's heavy punch instantly fell on the surface of the blood sun, and the terrifying power exploded. In just a moment, the blood sun evaporated for nearly half of the time. Halfway through, the volume shrunk several times, and at the same time it became much more illusory. But even so, this blood sun still did not completely dissipate. It only stagnated slightly. Then under Thor's shocked gaze, it instantly enveloped Hulk's entire body and drew a long bloody arc in the sky. Passing through the hull of the ship, it fell somewhere below. Seeing this scene, the whole place in the control room instantly fell into silence. Chapter 422, Part 1. There was silence for a moment, and finally, a voice sounded in the control room. Hulk, has he been dealt with? This voice instantly awakened everyone's sanity. Looking at the bloody sun getting further and further away from them in the distance, their faces couldn't help but become excited. It seems so. If you say that, are we safe? Don't be careless yet. Fury looked at Thor's figure on the deck forward, his face still solemn, showing no signs of relaxing. The battle is still not over. If Thor can't solve it, we are still in danger. As soon as these words came out, the place fell into silence again. But unlike the despair before, everyone's eyes were shining with light at this moment, and hope emerged in their hearts. If Thor and Hulk had just joined forces, even if they had Chen Luo on their side, they would have no confidence. But after Hulk was taken away, Chen Luo's only remaining enemy is Thor. The difficulty of solving it will undoubtedly be much smaller. Under everyone's expectant gaze, the next moment, Chen Luo's figure slowly emerged from the blood cloud. The batwing unfolded behind him, and his body turned into a sharp arrow, crashing through the air in front of him and flying in the direction of Thor. The body surface was wrapped in a layer of blood-colored flames. With the blessing of divine power, Chen Luo's speed nearly doubled at this moment. Before Thor could react, he was in front of him in an instant. A punch was thrown out, and the fist was enveloped in a layer of rich blood. It instantly broke through the lightning wrapped around Thor's body and hit his body area. Under the impact of huge amounts of power, Thor instantly soared into the sky, flying nearly 1,000 meters, and barely stopped until he smashed the clouds above. But it wasn't over yet. Chen Luo stood on the deck, stretched out one hand, and pointed his palm in the direction of Thor. A ball of blood light gradually condensed in the palm of his hand. The light group is only the size of a basketball file, but inside this light group, most of the remaining divine power in Chen Luo's body is condensed. The previous move that eliminated Hulk caused a lot of consumption of his divine power, so this move, it would not be an exaggeration to say that it was his last resort. But correspondingly, Thor's consumption at this moment is also not small. In the battle with Chen Luo just now, his divine power consumption was no less than that of the former. Coupled with the gap between the total amount of divine power between the two, his consumption, it is no exaggeration to say it is the biggest. With his current divine power, it is very difficult to resist Chen Luo's attack. Just like now, as the concentration of divine power is completed, the next moment, this bloody light group instantly cuts through the sky and blasts towards Thor. Seeing this scene, Thor's face tightened as he reacted, and he mobilized all the remaining divine power in his body without hesitation. He raised Mjolnir in his hand and pointed it forward, and a lightning beam burst out and shot forward. Two light beams, one red and one blue, collided together instantly rendering the entire sky into red and blue, which looked extremely magnificent. The two were in a stalemate, but within a moment, as Thor's divine power was exhausted little by little, the red beam finally gained the upper hand, gradually swallowing up the lightning beam in front and then wrapping Thor inside, accompanied by a painful roar, and then, under everyone's gaze, the surface of the body was covered with blood flames. As his strength was exhausted, Thor, who could no longer resist, closed his eyes, fell into a coma for an instant, and then turned into a bloody meteors are falling towards the sky. Seeing this scene inside the ship, Loki's eyes flashed, and he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity several times. But when he thought of the scene when he fought with Chen Luo before, he finally gave up the idea. It's time to leave. Although Chen Luo has not been solved, the purpose of his trip has been completed. The three major forces of Shield have also consumed a huge amount. They are no longer able to resist him and the Chitauri army that is about to arrive on Earth. This Earth will soon be fall into his hands. Thinking of this, Loki couldn't help but smile. Without staying here any longer, Luigi immediately turned around and left. But when he just walked out of the laboratory, at the corner ahead, Phil Coulson finally arrived with someone. Stop! Seeing Loki outside the door, Phil Coulson was startled. He subconsciously took out his weapon, pointed it forward, and spoke sternly. The team behind him also raised their weapons, and countless red dots appeared on Loki's body, ready to attack at any time. It's you. Seeing the person coming, Loki smiled, a cold light flashing in his eyes. Mortals dare to block God's way. Are you prepared to bear the consequences? Phil Coulson's face was extremely solemn. The weapon in his hand was still pointed forward, and he said solemnly, Loki, put down the weapon in your hand, and then go back to your cage. As soon as these words came out, the smile on Loki's face disappeared. His expression was extremely cold. He stared at the other person, and said, Mortal, do you know who you are talking to? How dare you offend gods and mortals? As punishment, I will give you death. As soon as he finished speaking, Loki instantly turned into a phantom and disappeared in place. After losing the target, everyone was shocked and looked around, their nerves extremely tense. A green phantom suddenly appeared, and immediately after, Loki appeared on the other side of the crowd. Almost subconsciously, Phil Coulson and others all aimed their weapons at where Loki was at this moment and pulled the triggers. Bang bang bang. Violent flames emerged from the muzzle of the gun, and countless bullets were fired in the direction of Loki. However, what shocked everyone was that their attacks did not have the expected effect. The bullets passed through Loki's body one after another, hit the wall behind, and then fell powerlessly towards the ground. But this is just the beginning. The next moment, dozens of phantoms appeared in the corridor again, tightly surrounding the team. Seeing all these Lokis walking towards them, Phil Coulson and others were even more panicked and wanted to launch an attack. However, facing so many targets, they didn't know where to start. Take responsibility. Just as everyone was hesitating, these Loki phantoms all raised the scepter in their hands. At the end of the scepter, a faint blue light flashed, and then quickly shot towards the crowd. Without any accident, dozens of rays instantly passed through everyone's bodies, seriously injuring everyone in an instant and leaving them unable to resist. Even the leader Phil Coulson is like this. Under Loki's special care, there were several more blood holes on his body at this moment. A large amount of blood began to flow out quickly, and life was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The phantom gradually disappeared, and Loki came to Phil Coulson and looked at him condescendingly, his eyes extremely cold. Mortal, this is the punishment God gives you. Farewell. After saying this, Loki walked forward without stopping, under the helpless gaze of Phil Coulson. He raised his arm with difficulty, raised the weapon in his hand, and pointed it in the direction of Loki, trying to prevent him from leaving. However, with the rapid loss of strength, he is now unable to even shoot, and can only watch the opponent leave. His eyelids became heavier and heavier, his arms dropped to the ground weakly, and he leaned against the wall behind him. Feeling the rapid passage of life force, a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Is it about to end? Director Nick Fury, I'm sorry, it seems I can't complete this mission. After saying this, just as he was calmly preparing to welcome his death, suddenly, a voice sounded from beside him. Chapter 423, Part 1. Phil Coulson? Chen Luo appeared in the corridor at some point. Looking at the tragic scene in front of him, he frowned and stepped forward quickly. Chen? Hearing Chen Luo's voice, Phil Coulson raised his head with difficulty, smiled bitterly and said, I'm so sorry for letting Loki escape. Don't talk about this yet. Looking at the wounds on the other party's body, Chen Luo said softly, You are going to die. Phil Coulson smiled slightly, his face calm. It doesn't matter. I have accepted the result. But Mr. Chen Luo, Loki will have trouble with you. If it were you, Mr. Chen Luo, I believe you can defeat him. I'm so sorry. I'm afraid I can't be of much help. After saying this, Phil Coulson finally couldn't hold on any longer, and his eyelids slowly began to close, as if he was about to fall into a deep sleep. Don't worry. Chen Luo suddenly spoke, with a smile on his face, Phil Coulson, your life is far from over. Keep living. From today on, you will have a new life. Raising his right hand, a drop of bright red blood slowly dripped from his fingertips and fell into Phil Coulson's mouth. As the blood integrated into his body, Phil Coulson's body gradually began to change. The few bloody holes in his body began to slowly close up and heal, and after a while, he fully recovered. Looking at Phil Coulson, who was still asleep but whose breathing had become much more stable, Chen Luo slowly stood up and did not stay here any longer. With a thought, he disappeared in an instant. Using the last remaining power in his body, when Chen Luo appeared again, Thor and the two people who had turned back into Banner at some point appeared in his hands. Put the two people back on the deck. Due to exhaustion of energy, both of them are in a coma at the moment. But it has to be said that even after such a fight, there were no obvious injuries on the two of them. The reason why this happened was because of Chen Luo's deliberate restraint, and because of their inhuman skills. Physical fitness and resilience also have a lot to do with each other. It goes without saying that Hulk, although after being knocked away by Chen Luo's blow, his body was covered with countless bone-deep injuries, Hulk's recovery power is comparable to that of Wolverine. Already recovered quickly. Although Thor is lagging behind them in terms of recovery ability, his physique is not weak at all. Although he has not grown to his peak state, due to the previous attack with Chen Luo, the divine power he faced at that time had been reduced by more than half, which was not enough to cause fatal damage to him. When he wakes up again, it won't take long for him to fully recover. However, it was precisely because he spent all his strength on rescuing the two of them that when Chen Luo came back, he saw Loki walking into a fighter plane and soaring into the sky, and he was no longer able to continue chasing. Thinking of the situation they were about to face after Loki left, Chen Luo also had a headache for a while. Originally, according to his idea, even if there would be an accident this time, Hulk would go berserk due to the influence of the mind gem, and his ability would be able to calm him down quickly, but he did not expect that an accident like Thor would happen this time. With the addition of Thor, Chen Luo's consumption has further increased, so that after he defeated the two more people, he now has very little divine power in his body. With his current situation, it is very difficult to deal with Loki, and even more don't tell me he will have an alien army coming soon. It would be fine if there were no strong men of more than half a body in that army, but if there really were strong men of this level, then this war would be really dangerous. According to his estimation, it would take at least a day for his divine power to be fully restored. Although Thor didn't know the specific situation, he thought it was not much different from him. So the best situation is to wait a day before Loki's side has just completed their plan and summon the army to come, giving himself time to recover. But based on his understanding of Loki, he would not miss such an opportunity. Taking advantage of the fact that all three of his own forces were unable to participate in the war, he would definitely take action, and he might even have started preparations now. Once Loki is allowed to complete the summoning within today, his plan might actually succeed. We have to find a way to delay time. At this thought, Chen Luo's eyes flashed, and he immediately turned around and walked towards the cabin. Arriving at the number 3 engine area, Chen Luo saw a figure wearing a steel battle suit busy in the distance. At this moment, his work had reached its final moment. Taking a closer look, I saw that Tony was currently among the spiral fan blades of the engine. The fan blades had been affected and had stopped rotating. Therefore, if you want the engine to return to normal, you must find a way to get the fan blades to operate again. Okay, in this situation, the only way to make it run is to let manpower enter it and push it. Only when the speed reaches a certain level will it start running on its own. This is the kind of job Tony does now. 2 dazzling flames were seen burning at the bottom of his feet. Under the powerful power, the propeller fan blades began to rotate slowly. As time went by, the fan blades rotated faster and faster. With Tony's all-out effort, finally, when the rotation speed exceeded Tony's propulsion speed, the fan blades behind it slammed into Tony, accompanied by a huge blast. The sound of metal collision instantly knocked it dozens of meters away, and then hit the ground heavily. Although Tony looked a little miserable at the moment, his efforts were rewarded accordingly. At the moment when Tony was thrown out, the fan blade speed finally reached the threshold and began to operate on its own. At the same time, the number 3 engine finally activated again. A heavy rumble sounded. As the engine began to operate normally, the spacecraft finally balance was restored. Ahem. Not far behind Chen Luo, Tony climbed up with difficulty and turned his head to look over. Did you succeed? Striding in front of the other party, Chen Luo leaned over to help Tony up, nodded, and said with a smile, "Don't worry, there will be no problem." Hearing Chen Luo's answer, Tony couldn't wait to breathe a sigh of relief, but the next moment, Chen Luo's voice sounded again. "But don't get too happy yet. Now we have a bigger problem that we haven't solved yet." Afterwards, Chen Luo told him roughly what happened just now. "So now Loki has left here, and you and Thor have also lost their fighting ability, right?" Tony covered his forehead with a headache and looked at Chen Luo and asked, "To be precise, I'm not considered a cripple now." Chen Luo shrugged. "At least I can hit you with one hand." Tony rolled his eyes at this, but did not refute. "There's no other way." Tony lowered his head and thought for a moment, then said, "Since we've reached this point, let's gather the others first and then think of a solution together." "It can only be the—" Chen Luo nodded, and after a brief discussion, he found the captain not far away, and the three of them walked towards the control room together. Chapter 424, Part 1. In a brand new laboratory. Except for Thor Banner, who was in a coma, everyone else had already gathered. Chen Luo, Tony, Steve, Fury, and Natasha Romanoff, who had just finished fighting with Barton, saw that everyone had arrived. Chen Luo didn't waste any words and immediately told everyone about the situation on his side. After hearing that Chen Luo Thor had lost most of his power at this moment, except for Tony, Fury's expressions changed instantly. If they didn't know much about the power of demigods like Chen Luo before, but after seeing the battle between Chen Luo and Thor Hulk today, they have a completely new understanding of this level of power. Cognition. In addition, now that Loki is out of trouble, if the opponent really opens the portal within this day and brings in the Chitauri army, without the help of Chen Luo Thor and the others, it will undoubtedly be much more difficult to defeat the opponent. And this is under the premise that the opponent does not have a strong demigod coming. Once a strong person of this level comes to the earth, apart from Hulk who has the strength to fight, they really can't imagine anyone here who can match him. Although Steve is the first superhero in the world, it has to be said that his strength may not even be able to deal with Tony, let alone a strong demigod. Not to mention Natasha Romanoff. Her strengths mainly lie in sneaking into places and obtaining intelligence. When it comes to actual combat power, she is even inferior to Steve. If she has to rely on her to fight demigods, it is simply let her die. As for Tony, with the ability of his armor, if he fights a strong demigod, he may be able to delay it for a while, but it is almost impossible to defeat him. After all, he has previously fought against Loki, who is not good at fighting head-on. After a fight, if Chen Luo hadn't taken action in time, whether he would be able to see him now is still a question. Fury suddenly had a headache when he thought about the situation on his side. Looking at the solemn expressions of Fury and others, Tony turned his head, looked at Chen Luo, nodded slightly, then stepped forward and said, "At this point, there is no other way. I think we should make two preparations now. One is to find the whereabouts of Loki and the others as soon as possible. If we can successfully stop them before they open the portal, that will undoubtedly be the best. But if we fail, we must also prepare a corresponding battle." Prepare. Now that Chen and Thor have temporarily lost most of their power, we have only one choice left. Having said this, Tony's face instantly became serious. He looked at everyone and said word by word, "Gather all the forces we can muster to fight against the army brought by Loki, so that we can have some chance of winning. After all, besides us, we don't have other helpers in this world." As soon as he finished speaking, Fury's eyes suddenly lit up, as if he thought of something, and he subconsciously said, "Tony, what do you mean? Mutant?" Tony nodded. "That's right. Everyone should know about Mutant's ability. If you use it well, you might be able to fight against the 4 demigods." His words are not unfounded. After all, there are also many strong mutants in the world today. Except for the batch of mutants 10 years ago, in the past 10 years, because humans have experienced the power of mutants, their attitude towards the mutants group has also undergone subtle changes, and they dare not deal with them as blatantly as before. This group. It is precisely because of this that the new generation of mutants that have grown up in the past 10 years also has many strong players. Just like the mutant children that Chen Luo met when he was dating Qin, Shadowcat Katie, Iceman Buck, Pyro John, and Colossus all have considerable strength now, and I think they can also be used in this war. Huge amounts of use. In addition to them, Professor, Magneto, Qin, Aurora, Scott, these veteran mutant powerhouses are all in their prime. After growing up in the past 10 years, Qin and others have also grown. To the extraordinary level, there are huge amounts of increase in ability. And based on the particularity of their abilities, in terms of difficulty, they are much stronger than ordinary extraordinary beings. It can be said that as long as the strong demigods don't come out, they can sweep them away. This is just a normal state. After all, with Qin's potential, if the ability in her body truly awakens and she successfully masters the Phoenix Force, not to mention demigods, she will have the strength to compete with even gods-level experts. Please give me flowers. Therefore, once Mutant joins, the difficulty of dealing with this war will undoubtedly be greatly reduced. But this was not over yet. After saying this, Tony continued, in addition to Mutant, we have other helpers here who can participate in the battle. Having said this, Tony smiled confidently, looked at everyone, and revealed his final trump card. Do you think we are the only current Avengers members? Hearing this, Fury was shocked. He took a deep look at Tony, Chen Luo, and the two of them, and suddenly felt enlightened. I see. Zero, so you have already been prepared for the Avengers plan, right? This time, Tony had no intention of concealing it anymore, and nodded readily. That's right. Speaking of which, we have to thank you even more for this. If you hadn't come to us with this proposal, I wouldn't have thought of that. After this period of hard work, there are already many strong people who have chosen to join us. Counting from the time Chen Luo and Tony decided to form the Avengers to now, in addition to the powerful Chen Luo blood clan, there are also Autobots, Wolverine, Logan, Ghost Rider, and others who have joined their organization. The total number is even more. There were about hundreds of people. Even the weakest among these people has the same fighting power as Natasha Romanoff, and a strong one like Ghost Rider can even compete with a strong demigod at full strength. With such a configuration, it will definitely have a huge amount of impact on this war. Hearing Tony's introduction, Fury and others couldn't help being shocked for a while, but when they thought that they had such strong reinforcements to join the battle, their hearts jolted, and they instantly gained a little more confidence. If there are these two reinforcements, even if Loki really opens the portal and lets the Chitauri army descend, we might still have a chance of winning. Natasha Romanoff was refreshed, and her beautiful eyes suddenly became brighter. She couldn't help but look in the direction of Chen Luo, and her thoughts were surging in her heart. Chapter 425, Part 1. Fury couldn't help but nod. Compared with the solemn look on his face before, he now became much more relaxed in an instant. His rationality returned again. He thought for a while and then suggested, in this case, we'd better act separately. First, we need to send people to find the whereabouts of Loki. Second, we need to go to Mutant to discuss and seek reinforcements. Finally, the Avengers outside also need to assemble as soon as possible to prepare for the possible war that will follow. Leave this to me. As soon as he finished speaking, Chen Luo stood up first and said calmly, whether it's Mutant or other Avengers members, Tony and I have the most contact with them here. But now my power is still recovering, so I'll leave the matter of finding Loki to Tony. As for the others, just leave it to me to notify you. 393, Chen Luo's words are not without purpose. Among everyone here, with his relationship with Chen and other mutants, he is undoubtedly the best to come forward to ask them for help. Good choice. And in addition to the mutant group, whether it is the Autobots or Logan, they all chose to join the Avengers because of Chen Luo. Therefore, only Chen Luo can bring everyone together. This is very clear to Fury and others. So after hearing Chen Luo's plan, Fury naturally had no intention of rejecting it. He nodded and said decisively, then it's decided. Loki will leave it to Tony and the captain to handle it. Chen, is there anything you need our help with? Chen Luo shook his head and was about to refuse. But at this moment, he seemed to suddenly think of something. After pondering for a moment, he changed his words casually. I really need your help with something, Fury. Oh, what is it? Fury asked quickly. Chen Luo smiled, pointed to the ground under his feet, and said, I need to commandeer this ship for a while now. I want to drive it to a place and then pick up some big guy to join the war. Big guy? Fury and the others were stunned at first, with a bit of curiosity in their eyes. Wait. Tony reacted immediately, turned to look in the direction of Chen Luo, and said in disbelief, no way, Chen. Are we really going to call it over? That's definitely. Chen Luo nodded and looked somewhere, his eyes full of expectation. If it participates in this battle, the pressure on our side can be reduced a lot. And it's been so long. It's time for him to come see the outside world, isn't it? Tony was stunned, and a huge figure appeared in his mind. Thinking of the other party, his face couldn't help but soften a little, and he nodded in agreement. That's right. After staying on that island for so many years, it's time to let it out. Let's go shopping. Looking at the expressions on the two people's faces, Steve was a little confused and said, Chen, Tony, who are you referring to, the big guy? You will know this when you see it. Chen Luo shook his head and said softly, but you can rest assured, its power is not much worse than Hulk. After hearing this, everyone's eyes suddenly lit up and their hearts became a little more excited. They had witnessed Hulk's power just now. In the battle with Chen Luo just now, it was a proper demigod-level combat power. Although it happened in a situation of extreme anger, even so, under normal conditions, temporarily it's not a problem to hold back a demigod. If the big guy Chen Luo talks about really has such strength, then they have no reason to refuse. If the other party comes to join the battle, their chances of winning will be even higher. Barton was also left by me just now. When he wakes up, if he can regain his consciousness, he might be able to help. At this time, Natasha Romanoff also suddenly spoke. Fury nodded and turned to look at the other person. In this case, Natasha Romanoff, then you can stay and act with Chun. In this case, when Barton wakes up, even if he still hasn't regained his consciousness, you can subdue him. Hearing this, Natasha Romanoff subconsciously turned her head to look in the direction of Chen Luo. Her eyes flashed, she said nothing, and nodded silently. Then let's take action now. The speed of this ship is not very fast, so if we want to arrive in time, we can't waste time. After reaching an agreement, Tony looked at the mothership at his feet and thought thoughtfully. You don't have to worry about this. Chen Luo had already planned this and said calmly, if you want this big guy to speed up, I have a way. Everyone looked over, a trace of curiosity flashing in their eyes. Chun, what can you do? Tony asked curiously. Chen Luo smiled indifferently, turned his palm, and a bronze cube about the size of a basketball file instantly appeared in his hand. Use this. This is. Seeing the object in Chen Luo's hand, Fury seemed to think of something, his eyes shrank, and he was a little surprised. Chen Luo naturally understood what the other party meant, but he had no intention of hiding it. Anyway, what he was going to do next would definitely remind the other party of something, so it was better to tell the other party directly to avoid any gaps between the two parties. Director Nick Fury guessed it right. I think you should be very familiar with this thing. Chen Luo shook the source of fire in his hand and said, I found this thing at the bottom of the dam after finishing dealing with Megatron. This is an artifact belonging to the Autobots. At that time, Optimus Prime and the others had agreed to hand over this artifact to me for safekeeping. So I think you won't mind, Director, right? Seeing the smile on Chen Luo's face, Fury's face froze. Then he immediately reacted and nodded with a smile. That's definitely no problem. Since this is a treasure that belongs to the Autobots, it's only natural that it should be returned to its original owner. There was no way, since this thing was now in Chen Luo's hands, they couldn't say anything more. After all, when they were in crisis in 3.0, Chen Luo came to save them, not to mention what this thing was. It is not a treasure of the Autobots, and they are embarrassed to ask the other party to return the source of fire based on the kindness of saving lives. What's more, according to Chen Luo, now that all the Autobots have joined his command, this treasure belonging to the Autobots belongs to Chen Luo, and no one can say there is any problem. If they express objections at this time, not Chen Luo among them, I'm afraid not many of his subordinates would agree. As expected, seeing Fury's reaction, Chen Luo already knew that this matter had already changed the story in the other person's mind. Chen, you said this thing can speed up the spacecraft? What should be done? At this time, Tony's voice sounded, and he looked at the fire source in Chen Luo's hand with burning eyes, full of curiosity.